So welcome everyone. I hope you are ready for the grand finale of the 39th IYPT. I'm really happy to see that so many teams, in spite of the rather tiring week of physics fight, but also very nice excursions and tours, and I also heard a lot of bathing in the sea, that you found the power to wake up and come for this final. That's really great because we have 3 very good and very strong teams. As I said, like the IYPT is gaining its age and it's getting mature, which also means that we are getting up to the standards of other Olympiads and having the Asian countries in front. So we'll have the teams from Singapore, Korea, and China competing this morning. I was here for a long time at the beginning. I'll be back during the closing ceremony again. But I would like to use the sometimes rare occasion to have our dear honorary president Alan Allenson here, which I would like to welcome him on stage.
Thank you.
And Alan will be in charge for being a non-voting chair of this finals. So he will now take over, introduce the teams, introduce the jury, and do all the job that the chairs do, except of the one, and that it's grading. So he will not grading, he will just be ruling the whole game in the morning. So Alan, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me well. For some of you, you won't know me at all because it's been a few years since I've been here. I was president from 2008 to 2015, and so that's why it's an honorary president. It means X, basically. But Martin has took the opportunity to be in the jury and vote, and I am happy to be here just coordinating what's going on and making sure everything goes smoothly. Some general things before we get our teams introduced. A reminder, it is the final, you're on show. We want to see the very best of you. We want to see that you've thought about what you're doing. For example, no internet connections, and that you are being respectful of each other, and it is a scientific discussion rather than anything more than that. We're going to introduce our teams in the order they're sitting, not the order they qualified for. And so if I could ask you to come up and give the captain from China an opportunity to introduce her team.
We are Team China, and from right to left, here is Yan Tingsong, Hao Bozhou, Yuan Weixia. I'm the captain, Hui Jinghuang. Here is Qing Tongliu. We wish to have a thoughtful, peaceful, and meaningful discussion. Thank you.
And good luck, China. And if we move across to the team from Korea.
Hello, I'm Dong Kim, the captain of Team Korea. And to my left is Taeyeon Won, Seungyeon Kim, Siu Choi, and Hanseok Kim. And it's been 8 years since our last final, so I hope we have a constructive and a good physics fight. Thank you.
And finishing up with the team from Singapore. Please introduce your team.
Hello everyone, I'm Kieran Ho, the captain of Team Singapore, and my teammates are Yikin, Jing Yao, Sinza, Ni Jun, and here we have our team mascots with us, our official mascot, Mark the Monkey, as well as Capybara, Penny, Penny Jr., and Miku. And we hope to have an insightful and engaging fitness fight. Thank you.
I think the team from Singapore have them outnumbered here. So we go straight on, and as Martin has said, I will not be voting on the jury. On these days, it's tricky to keep an eye on everything going on and still actually come up with a reasonable grade, so I appreciate that we're doing that. I'd now like to invite all our jurors to introduce themselves and say good luck to the teams as well. So if we start at the far end, Leo? Mike. That one works.
Good morning. My name is Liane Brandt. I'm a physicist from Germany, working in the University of Ulm and for the German Physical Society organizing the IYPT.
Thank you.
Hello, ni hao, and annyeonghaseyo. So my name is Vitaya from Thailand. I'm a physics teacher, been involved with IYPT since 2016. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Samuel Byland. I teach physics at a high school here in Zurich, and I've been involved with IYPT since, I think, 2004. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gavin Jennings. I'm a high school teacher as well from New Zealand. I've been involved with IYPT since, 2007, and I'm looking forward to a really good fight today.
Hello everyone, I'm Georgi Khomeriki from Georgia. Just like the most of you, I've been an ex-IYPT participant in 2016. I work in cosmology in higher order statistics. I wish you a great final.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, hi teams. I'm Mihai Hömösrei, physics teacher in Hungary in a high school and at the ELTE University, involved in IYPT since 2013, and I'm really thankful that all of you are here to this tournament and you made it possible, and I wish the best luck for the teams.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Daniel Keller. I'm here from Zurich. I'm teaching physics at the school where Mr. Byland teaches. He's my boss. He brought me to the IYPT in 2005. Since then, I couldn't leave. It was the first time in Switzerland. Now it's in Switzerland again. I'm very glad to be still here. Now, to all of you, I wish you good luck and a great performance in the fight.
Thank you.
Okay, so once again, you know me well already, so just on the scientific part, I work at the Slovak Academy of Sciences and Czech Academy of Sciences while doing quantum computing and dealing with quantum security. And besides of this, I'm a full professor at the university and preparing the future physics teachers, so there'll be future team leaders for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, just a little bit of my own background. I've already said about being president. I am just a high school teacher as well. This is an education competition as well as a great physics competition, and I've been involved since 1998.
Hello, my name is Qingtong Liu from Team China, and now I will begin my report on question number 8, magnetic accelerator. First, let's have a quick review on the problem. Fix magnets and pairs onto a metal sheet as shown. If you attach 2 magnetic disks onto an axle, this vehicle will accelerate over the rows of magnets under certain conditions. Investigate the phenomenon. So in analysis, we can see that the independent variables in these questions include the parameters of the magnetic vehicle, the array, the metal sheet, and the initial conditions. And the dependent variables for these problems include the final velocity of the car and the acceleration variation of the car. We also analyzed the key tasks for the problems, which includes to identify the mechanism of the magnetic acceleration, to investigate the car's final velocity and acceleration variation versus the parameters, and to investigate the conditions for an effective acceleration. So first, we will enter our preliminaries. Through our preliminary experiments, we can see that the final velocity will have a positive relation with the array magnet's magnetization. It will also have a positive relation with the array magnet's number. However, this result is only partially correct due to the limit of our experimental condition and will be corrected later. The final velocity also has a positive relation with the sheet's opening angle, as well as a negative relation with the axle width. Furthermore, we observe that in order for the car to accelerate effectively, the base magnets must be magnetized along the z direction. The wheels must repel the base magnets, and the car must be released from the wide edge. Based on these results, we further make some assumptions for our later analysis, which includes that the base magnets must be rectangular, the metal sheet is ferromagnetic, and that the car is rolling without slipping. Next, we can enter our theoretical model. We'll first give a qualitative explanation for the phenomenon. Intuitively, we can imagine that the arrangement of the array magnet will cause the car's potential energy to decrease oscillatory along the travel direction, which will create the effect of acceleration. Meanwhile, the eddy current in the plate will also produce a drag on the magnet car. The two effects will altogether determine the motion of the car. Next, we can present our quantitative model. Assuming that the car is rolling without slipping, we can easily write out the translational and rotational Newton's second law of the car, and combining the two will give us the total mechanical equation for the system. In this equation here, the Fx term refers to all the magnetic forces acting on the car, which includes the contribution from the array, the contribution of the plate's magnetization, as well as the contribution from the eddy current damping. So our next task is simply to solve for these three contributions separately. We first solve for the array B field by introducing the magnetic scalar potential, where the vertical magnetization is effective as the top and bottom charge on the magnet. We can derive the B field created by a single rectangular magnet. The result can be obtained analytically, and the solution is included in the appendix. We can then obtain the total array B field through linear superposition. We can compute the potential created by the wheel magnets in a similar way, which is necessary because the plate's magnetization is a result of both the wheel and the array fields. Next, we solve for the plate's magnetization. We assume that the plate is ferromagnetic, and because the plate is very thin, we can further neglect the coupling between the in-plane and the vertical H field, and that the in-plane H field is independent of the z direction. Therefore, we can solve for the in-plane H field as well as the vertical H field separately, obtaining the corresponding side charge and top and bottom charge separately, and thus obtaining the total H field created by the plates. For the in-plane H field, we can separate the magnetization potential from the total potential to see that it follows the 2D Laplace equation under the same-plate approximation. By approximating that mu r to affinity for the in-plane field, we can further obtain the boundary conditions. Since the trapezoidal region is difficult for us to solve, we can then use the conformal mapping to map the outer region of the plate to the outer space of a unit circle in the complex plane, which we will denote as W. The equation can be solved first in the W space and then be remapped to the physical space we're working in. The remapping process are achieved using the MATLAB's SD toolbox. We can then derive the side charge and the corresponding H field. As for the vertical field, under sim-plate approximation, we can separately obtain the following relations. The total field written as the sum of the external field combined in the demagnetization field, the constitutive relation between the magnetization and the H field, and the explicit expression for the demagnetization field derived from the definition of the scalar potential. We can see that these three equations are actually coupled, and we can combine them to obtain the total result for a total equation for the top and bottom charge. Combining the three, we can obtain the following equation for the top and bottom charge, which can be solved numerically, eventually giving us the corresponding field. As a result, we can obtain the total external field created by the array and the plates. We can obtain the force due to these two fields using the same charge method. As for the eddy current damping, we can cite the result from literature, where we write out the corresponding dipole as the magnetization times the volume of the vehicle. By now, we can already solve for the motion of the car. We will now discuss the features in the motion, focusing on the acceleration process and the effective acceleration region. We'll first solve for the motion of the car, discovering that the acceleration to decrease in fluctuation, while the velocity to increase in minor fluctuations, matching with our intuition. We can then plot out the potential energy distribution to have a more direct picture of the motion. We can see that as the number of magnets increase, the potential energy gradient will increase, generally resulting in a larger final velocity. The same is observed at a large plate opening angle. As theta increases, the acceleration is going to be more significant. The same result can be observed when we increase the base width of the plate. and when we increase the magnetization of the array magnets. Furthermore, we can plot out the parameter space to see that when the car is released from a different location on the track, when can it accelerate effectively, and when it can, what speed can it reach? The dashed regions in the graph refers to the ineffective regions. When the car is released in these regions, it cannot reach the end of the plate. The color regions can accelerate effectively, and the color refers to the final velocity. The vertical axis refers to the parameters such as the base width, and the horizontal axis refers to the location the car is released. From the plot, we can see several ineffective regions along the track. We can use the potential energy to explain this ineffective region. When the car is released in the potential well, it will be trapped and cannot accelerate out of the plate's region. We can see that in a large A region, there are few regions for effective acceleration, but tend to reach a large final velocity when acceleration can be achieved. Similarly, we can see that in the small axle width region, there are fewer regions for effective acceleration, but tend to reach a larger final velocity when acceleration can be reached. We can also see that in the large theta and n region, there are more accelerating regions and can generally reach a larger final velocity. In our theory, we first derive the forces acting on the car, and so for the motion of the car, and then analyze the motions through potential energy and parameter spaces. Next, we will enter our experiments. In our experiment, we use such a setup to track the static force acting on the car at different places, where we use a laser to assure the string, the car's center, and the plate's central line are aligned. We use a force meter for measurement and use a glass fiber threaded pipe as the axle. When acquiring motion data, we use a steel wire distance meter to control the release location, and use the burning string method as shown in the video there to reduce perturbation. We use a high-speed camera to acquire data from 2 meters away to avoid parallax, and use tracking to track the trajectory, and use MATLAB for data processing. And now we can enter our experiment's content. We first use a Gauss meter to measure the B field right above the magnets to fit the corresponding magnetization for both the rectangular magnet and the wheel magnets. And then we can verify the results, the quantities we obtained in our theory. We scan the Gauss meter across the array to measure the B field and find that our experiment and our theory matched quite well. We further verify the rolling without slipping assumption by tracking 10 trials with tracker, obtaining their translational and rotational velocity. We use the force meter to verify the static EM force along the track and find great agreement with our theory. Next, we can investigate the parameters that will affect the motion of the system. We then investigate how the velocity variation change with parameters. By releasing the vehicle from the first effective potential barrier, we can see that at a large base width or a small axle width, the fluctuation in velocity is actually more significant, as can be shown also in the video here. We also verify the VT results when we change theta and n, and find great agreement between our experiment and theory, as well as the observable fluctuation in the system. We can further investigate how the final velocity changed with parameters and observe a positive trend for both A and negative trend for W, which is due to the close distance between the wheel magnets and the array magnets, which will cause a stronger magnetic interaction, both conforming with our theory. We can also see that a similar positive trend appears when we change theta. However, when we increase n, we can actually see that the trend is not monotonic, but first negative, then positive. This result is not observed in our previous preliminary experiments, and the plot of parameter space due to the limited resolution. The explanation we give to this finding is that in the small n region, as n increases, the fluctuation in U, the potential energy, is going to increase due to a larger damping, leading to a larger damping, resulting in a reduce in the final velocity. However, in the large n region, the potential energy becomes almost monotonic, and the contribution of damping is no longer varies. In this case, as n increases, the potential difference is going to increase more significantly, and the final velocity is going to then increase. Lastly, we release the car from different places to verify our parameter space, where here we change both the release potential as well as the axle width and the base width, and as well as the opening angle and the number of magnets, and find the results to conform with our theory well. And here are our discussion of the errors. And now we can enter our conclusion. In this problem, we first modeled the motion of the vehicle and computed the force acting on it. We use the charge method for force calculation and use the conformal mapping and Fredholm equation to solve for the plate's magnetization. We then analyze the acceleration and process of the car, as well as the effective acceleration, as well as the final velocity of the car's dependence on the parameters. After that, we constructed an experimental setup where we used the bending string method and used a high-speed camera to measure the motion of the system. And we find that our experiment and our theory match well. In different cases, such as the change of the potential edge, in cases such as the change of the effective acceleration region, as well as their dependence of parameters to the final velocities. So that's all for my report. Thank you. And here's my reference.
Okay, thank you. And we move straight on to questions from the opponent.
This is opponent Hanseo Kim from Team Korea, and I would like to ask some questions. How did you manipulate the number of magnets? Was the length of sheet kept constant?
Yes.
Okay. And what is your definition on the final velocity? Where was it measured exactly?
We define the final velocity as the velocity when the car reaches the end point
edge
of the plate.
Edge of the metal sheet, right? Okay. So experimental setup, was it rigorously controlled? Your accuracy on the error analysis page, it says that it's about 5 millimeter per second deviation, but your tracker deviation is actually 50 millimeter per second according to your error analysis. Can you elaborate?
Sorry, can you explain it again?
So your error analysis says less than 5 millimeter per second for the initial release perturbation, but your tracker noise is about 50 millimeter per second. How does it correspond?
Well, because we only here we only track the initial for the initial velocity we only track the initial point, and for the tracker frame to frame noise, that's like the result.
So basically, you track the initial release perturbation with tracker 2. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. At experimental and simulational parameters, none of your fixed parameters were identified. Can you specify, especially for graph with changing W?
Sorry, can you?
None of your fixed parameters were identified in your presentation, and I would like to hear your explanation about graph with changing W.
Can you say, is this graph?
Yes, the left.
Okay, so in this graph, in this graph, we fix the base width, the half base width as.
Okay. So was it kept consistent within the report?
It's not kept constant between the theory and the experiment.
Not the W, like the other parameters.
Yes, they are for the changing W.
It is consistent within the report, right?
For changing W, yes.
Okay. The range of parameters in W graph seems different between the VT and the heat map. Do you believe that you have captured the full tendency with either of them?
Yes, I believe so.
And the initial acceleration at page 56, it seems about 800 millimeter per second, which doesn't correspond with your characterization about perfect rolling. Does it correspond?
Okay, we're going to have to stop you there.
Thank you.
You are at the end of time. You've got 3 minutes preparation. The reporter can sit down. Thank you.
This is opponent Hanseo Kim from Team Korea, opposing problem number 8, magnetic accelerator. For the task fulfillment for the phenomenon, they have to explain what conditions may exhibit given phenomenon, and for the theoretical part, they have to establish a theory on acceleration covering every conditions that have been suggested. For experiment, they have to conduct an experiment with variables independently changing, and result, they have to compare the acceleration with suitable dependent variable. So to summarize the report, qualitatively, they have the preliminary experiments done for many variables, and motion was predicted under potential energy. Quantitatively, they have modeled eddy current and conformal mapping, and numerical analysis was employed to predict velocity and parameter map. For experiment, they used laser to assure the vehicle to align, and burn the thin string to release the vehicle was kind of questionable in our point of view. Experimental result, they had various parameters analyzed for final velocity and the parameter map also. For their theoretical strengths, they introduced in-plane H field for sheet magnetization effect. They constructed vector field, established governing equation, and conducted numerical analysis for their theoretical part. They also considered eddy current to account for the damping, and introduced assumption and methodology to make analysis on the motion. They investigated ineffective acceleration ranges also. But they also had some possible improvements. They had no clear definition for final velocity until we had question about it, and absence of qualitative analysis on parameter dependency was also their possible improvement. Effect of eddy current is not suggested numerically in scale, and tendency and parameter map is not explored fully. Too many model was applied, which would make error propagation, which should result in large deviation, and effect on both vehicle width and sheet width is not considered separately. For the experimental part, they had corresponding experiment with the theory, several considered parameters, and considered various effects regarding VT and final velocity and parameter maps. They had separate setups for various characterization and considered deviation due to other calibration terms. Rigorously controlled experiment setup was also their strength. Possible improvements are experimental condition being not clarified. We had to question about it, but the fixed parameter was not quite answered properly. Questionable initiating process was also their possible improvement. Deviation for final velocity was not also analyzed. Parameter map and the final velocity graph do not give overall analysis on the phenomenon itself, and big error on the tracker noise was also their experimental flaw. For the discussion point, I would like to go over the discussion point first, and the independency of parameter was kind of very unclear in their presentation. Absence of proper fixed parameter explanation was kind of their discussable point, and I would like to discuss it with the reporter. And when manipulating the number of gaps, the length of the sheet itself was kept constant, so the gap between the magnets also changed while they changed the number of magnets. They might have not interpreted what the physical cause of the dependency is from. And A and W have related effects also, and we would like to discuss on it. Next discussion point is on investigation on configuration. Having attracting magnets at the very edge of the metal sheet would create a potential well that would make defined VF, which means the exiting velocity of the metal sheet larger than they expected. And also, interpretation on result was also kind of questionable. The lump size in W equals 45 and 50 conditions, and initial velocity in N equals 5, 6, 7, 8 conditions in their graph didn't show monotonic tendency, and they didn't have any physical insight on it. We would like to discuss on it and the physical cause on it. Also, the experimental flaws had some questionable error analysis that we have questioned them in the Q&A session, and the verification on perfect rolling should be also discussable. I would like to invite the reporter to the stage for discussion.
Thank you. If we could move to the next phase.
Okay, so how about if,
11.
Okay, so just now I think the opponent has mentioned points about lacking the qualitative explanation on the parameter space. So how about if we can proceed on to this part first?
Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry, but I think my slide is okay. Yeah. Maybe you can go to the whiteboard here.
Okay. So my discussion point was initially about the independency of parameter at first. So I would really like to talk more about our Q&A, about absence of explanation on fixed parameters in your explanation slides. Can you move to slide where there was graph depending on W?
Is this one the graph you're talking about?
Okay. So the range of W in this page should be 100 to 60 approximately, right?
Yes.
And as your qualitative explanation says, as the W decreases, it shows higher VF tendency. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and can you move on to VT analysis, which you track the with the W?
This one?
Yeah, this one. So at the W equals 28, 32, 35 conditions, which is blue, red, and green respectively, it doesn't show any tendency that you have analyzed through your parameter map. I think this is due to your parameter map not capturing the whole W condition, and thus not capturing the whole tendency on the phenomenon itself. How can you explain physically on it?
Well, I think this might be due to like the limitation. I think this might be due to like the limitation of our like the range of our tracking, because
okay, so it was a experimental flaw?
I believe so.
Okay, then seemingly it had like increasing tendency, intensifying tendency as the W gets smaller. But according to your theory, it should have like exponentially growing VF at the lower W conditions. But how does experimental flaw account for it?
Well, I believe that. So basically, as we can see here, like when the magnet reaches the end, when the car reaches the end of the array, its acceleration should be increasing, right? So, okay. I believe that what we have done here is that we might have lacked a little bit of, we might have tracked a little bit. It might be due to like a track.
Let me change up the question a bit.
Okay.
Let me change up the question a bit. So, according to your explanation, what is your thought on the cause that actually caused the experimental flaw in those tendency?
It might be due to like the error in the lanes in the lanes we tracked, like the
which one?
In the region we tracked in the tracker process.
So the tracker was the main error point.
Yes, I believe so.
then doesn't it mean that your experimental setup was not rigorous enough to account for the motion of the accelerating condition?
I believe that we have. We have tried to use Tractor to ensure our tracking the data to be as accurate as possible. But I believe that perhaps like more accurate result can be made to ensure that the data can be more accurate.
Okay, I believe that we don't really have an accordance on the accuracy of the measurement effect, but I do believe that it is an important effect. And I would like to ask about the importance of gap in between the magnets and the number of magnets.
Okay.
You've manipulated number of magnets by changing the gap in between, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Doesn't the gap in between also change?
Yeah, but the gap between the magnets is not set as one of the primary parameters in our theoretical model.
Like, how's that physically accounted? Because as the gap in between the magnets decrease, the potential hill created by each magnet will overlap, and thus creating a more smooth potential
hill. And that's actually what we have observed in our plots, as you can see earlier. Yes.
So doesn't it mean that it is the gap in between the magnets that really caused that tendency? So it wasn't number of magnets that caused the tendency. It was rather gap in between the magnets.
But I think that actually our model offers the same insight, right? Because as the number of magnets increase, the rate actually turns from a more discrete distribution into a more like a more continuous distribution, which causes the more monotonic trend in the potential energy gradient.
Okay, so number of magnets when the length is differing. If the number of magnets increase with different gaps, it wouldn't really change the phenomenon, because the potential hills created by each magnet will be...
I believe you have a point, but I do want to emphasize here that when we're changing in our theory, we're actually keeping the length of the trail as a constant.
Okay.
So basically, I also think of the n here as the number density in the track, but like it's basically due to our setting of the geometry in our system.
Basically, number of magnets change the gap in between the magnets. Thus, the gap in between the magnets is the direct parameter.
Actually, I believe that's only partially correct, because as we can see that as we increase the number of magnets, the number of fluctuation in the system is also going to increase, and that's solely because of the increase of magnets. However, I believe the trend towards a more monotonic trend is actually more due to like the trend that the trend towards a more monotonic trend in the potential energy due to the increase of n in a limited length.
Okay, for the time being, I believe we'll have to move on, but I think we had some physical discussion on it. The next point is about the configuration of the magnets. So earlier you have defined the final velocity, which expresses the efficiency of acceleration as the exiting velocity at the very edge of the metal sheet, right?
Yes.
So you have only considered about the repulsing cases, right?
Yes, that's correct. But we have also provided some discussion on other cases. Yes. But we have to say that we didn't really conduct experiments and only provided some like a theoretical insight onto the other cases, and we can elaborate on that right now. So just give me one quick second.
Okay, while the presenter, while the reporter is turning to the page.
Sorry, can I have the pen and
sure.
so that I can give a quick explanation?
Okay.
Yeah, sure. So basically, we have discussed 3 different cases, and we have considered 3 different initial cases in our problem. So the case that we have mainly discussed in our theory is a case when the whole array. I'm sorry.
Sorry to interrupt, but like that's not the case that we were talking about.
Okay.
So let me elaborate more. So basically, basic formation is that you have repulsing cases for every one of these.
Yes, that's correct.
And my suggestion is that you just turn this to attracting case right here. Then the potential hill should be like this, right?
Yes.
And the exiting velocity, like actual velocity at this point solely, should be maximized with this configuration. Can you agree on this point?
Yes, I agree. And I do believe that that's perhaps an interesting point that we can elaborate in the future.
So you haven't investigated fully on your definition of efficiency of acceleration.
Yes, yes. And I also want to make it clear that we have investigated 3 different cases in our problem, which includes the whole impulsing, whole attracting, as well as the alternating polarity case. And
I think we can agree on that investigation you have made, and we can move on to the next discussion point. And some interpretation on results is quite questionable. So most majorly, can you turn to page 56? Okay,
this one?
Match the slide number. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, so here, as you can see, green, yellow, purple, and brown indicates n equal 5, 6, 7, 8 cases respectively, okay?
Yes.
And the initial velocity tendency shows fluctuating tendency. How does your physical interpretation on it explain this phenomenon?
Can you elaborate again?
So you can see the graph right here. At the initial conditions, the green, yellow, purple, and brown oscillates in tendencies at initial velocity, initial acceleration to be precise. Okay?
Yes, that's correct.
How can you physically interpret this situation?
I'm not actually quite sure about the point you made about accelerating at a non-zero velocity, because you can see here that all the cars here are actually released at a zero velocity.
Well, it's at zero, but initial acceleration, to be precise, it differs.
Well, I think that is actually very natural because, I mean...
But I disagree on the explanation that it's natural, because as you could see from the potential energy diagram...
Can I make a quick correction? Like you can see that actually the points here actually all have a quite... actually all have a very like little...
okay, but you have...
Because like, I want to explain that, like, for example, if we release a car from the exact point here, then technically... it is like an unstable equilibrium point, so technically, theoretically, it won't fall over the side. So we have to add a little
we'll have to continue on.
Yes.
So the peak the velocity reaches is about 800 millimeter per second.
Yes.
But your characterization on perfect rolling was up to 450 millimeter per second velocity. How does that correspond? How does that explain your assumption?
Well, perhaps that explains that perhaps like more investigation on the on the verification of the rolling without slipping might be made. However, I still believe that the rolling without slipping assumption in our theory is mostly valid.
Okay. We'll have to move on to the summary for the time being. And
okay, you've got 1 minute for
to summarize the discussions, we had discussion about independency of parameters. We have suggested the number of magnets and the gap in between the magnets also change, and it is the main factor that causes the potential Hill map to change. And we didn't have agreement on it, but I still believe that it's the major factor. Gap in the between is the major factor. And we had also discussion about investigation and configuration, and the reporter has agreed that this configuration, which has the attracting magnet at the edge, should have the final velocity as the largest. Also, we had this discussion about interpretation on results, and the reporter didn't give clear explanation on alternating tendency of initial acceleration for differing magnet cases. As the number of magnets changed, in their potential Hill diagram, the Hill showed monotonic tendency, so the explanation about potential energy doesn't quite correspond. Also, we had discussion about experimental flaws and how their verification on perfect rolling was not valid, and the reporter has admitted that it is a possible improvement in the future also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I state, please, when they're busy in conversation, that we try and keep the noise so that the judging panel can hear clearly as well. We go straight on now to questions from the reviewer. So, starting timing, thank you.
Thank you to both the reporter and opponent for the insightful discussion. To the reporter, can you go to slide 63? 63.
Oh, 60, sorry.
Wait, 63. Okay, so on the graph on the right, it shows the variance of the final velocity against number of magnets.
Yes.
Is that correct? So we see that the final velocity is around 40 centimeters per second. Is that correct? Can you go to slide 60?
Sorry?
Okay, so can you go to slide 60 now?
Okay.
Okay, so can you go to the slide where you show the velocity against time for different number of magnets?
Sorry?
Can you go to the graph where you show the velocity against time for different number of magnets?
Like this one?
No. Okay, it's okay. Okay, so to the reporter, what is the greatest value of the magnetic field entering the metal plate?
Like the B field created by the metal plate?
Yes.
Okay, I think we can see the plot here in our experimental data. We can see that it will increase the B field by approximately like the largest to about like 10% or so.
No. What was okay? Wait, to the reporter. So So you mentioned that the ferromagnetic plate's response was more or less linear. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, and we can see it in most of the regions in our system, the assumption is actually valid.
Okay, so you also assume that the relative permeability goes to infinity. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's actually due to the different directions.
Thank you.
So
to the opponent, do you believe that this is a valid assumption?
The linear assumption.
No, the assumption that the relative permeability goes to infinity.
For the steel, it is really large value, so I think it might be valid.
Okay, I see. So, to the reporter, do you account for air drag and rolling friction?
We have analyzed the errors in the contributions in our appendix and show that they are actually negligible compared
to the opponent, do you believe that the reporter should have included air drag and rolling friction in his model?
Error of? Air drag coefficient.
Yes, air drag and rolling friction.
They should have compared the scale of air drag and eddy current and choose what to account.
Okay, I see. So, to the reporter, you modeled the wheels as dipoles for the eddy currents, is that correct?
That's correct, and that's mainly due to the scale of the eddy current is actually smaller. It's actually one scale smaller than the contribution of the driving force, so that itself actually won't lead to a very large error.
Wait, to the opponent, do you believe that this is a valid model?
To my scaling calculation about the eddy current, it was about 0.1 newtons, so it about matches the force sensor that they have measured.
Okay, I see. So to the opponent, do you believe that it is important to show the full acceleration against time of the car?
Full
acceleration against time.
Time versus time?
Yes.
It's more important to show full acceleration versus the distance.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Okay, that is your time. You have 3 minutes preparation. The reporter and opponent can sit down. And I'm losing. Okay, you have...
Good morning, everyone. I'm Zhu Yijun from Singapore, and I'll be reviewing magnetic accelerator. Firstly, on the reporter had a good experimental setup where magnets were aligned and a car was released by burning a string, allowing him to control release conditions precisely. His theory also accounts for many factors in the phenomenon, such as the ferromagnetic response and eddy currents, and he also investigated a large range of parameters and their effect on acceleration. Now I'd like to move on to the areas of improvement. I believe that the reporter made little effort in explaining not only the phenomenon, but also the significance of the ferromagnetic plates. He also did not explain the experimental trends for multiple parameters. For example, the track angle. I believe that he should have considered the distance indifference between each magnet roll and the wheel to explain the net magnetic force exerted on the wheels and hence explain why the acceleration changes while varying the track angle. Additionally, I would like to point out that in his trend for number of magnets, there was a turning point in the graph which he did not explain clearly. I believe the existence of a turning point suggests the existence of competing factors which he should have explained. Next, I believe that the report also made many unphysical assumptions by considering the relative permeability to be going to infinity, which cannot account for the saturation of ferromagnetic material. Additionally, for the eddy currents, it was modeled as a dipole, which we know over-predicts the magnetic force when the wheel is close to the ferromagnetic plates. He also did not account for mechanical damping in his model, and it was unclear how he obtained the final velocity in his report. Now I'd like to move on to the opponent. I commend the opponent for pointing out the lack of qualitative explanation in the report. The opponent clearly pointed out that it was unclear how the different parameters affected the acceleration of the car. They also discussed about this in their discussion, which I'll be talking about later. Additionally, the opponent also pointed out the inconsistency between the error analysis and the error bars in the report, and also clarified the definition of the final velocity, which is very important because the final velocity is a metric which allows us to define how strong the acceleration of the vehicle is. Next, he also pointed out some oversimplifying assumptions, such as the eddy currents, which were modeled as a dipole, and suggested a numerical model, which I believe to be more accurate. Now I'd like to move on to some areas of improvement. Although he did point out that there was a lack of qualitative explanation, I believe that the opponent should have done more to improve the qualitative explanation by discussing the trends in the report. Additionally, the opponent did not probe the reporter about the lack of mechanical damping in his model, even if the reporter believes that they were negligible. Lastly, I believe that the opponent also missed out some theoretical assumptions made by the reporter, such as the relative permeability going to infinity, as well as the linear response of ferromagnetism, which could be affected by magnetic saturation. Now let's look at the discussion between the opponent and the reporter. On the issue of the independence variance of parameters, I partially agree with the opponent. I believe that the reporter should have varied the parameters independently, and the reporter's explanation for the tracking error, which did not allow him to explain the lack of trend, I believe that this explanation is not sufficient, and I believe that one possible reason could be the inconsistency in calculating the final velocity, which was not defined well. Now, on the issue of the varying the number of magnets, I agree with the opponent that the gap between the magnets and the number of magnets should be varied differently, because the gap between the magnets is actually a separate parameter on its own that can affect how the acceleration of the vehicle is. And I also believe that it will be more physically insightful to separate the two parameters and instead vary the entire plate length while you vary the number of magnets. Next, I agree with both the opponent and the reporter on the attraction case, where I believe that it could be physically insightful to investigate the plate where all magnets were attracting, because it could reverse the potential hue. Onto the oscillatory trend, I agree with the opponent that the reporter should have considered the initial acceleration, because the initial acceleration could have a different trend from the final velocity, because the initial acceleration is mainly affected by the rows closest to the wheel at the back. Now on to some missed points. I believe that the opponent should have discussed with the reporter more about the explanation of the phase plots and how different areas of the phase plot show that the vehicle did not accelerate. I also believe that there was very little points on the phase plot which the opponent should have brought up in the discussion. Additionally, I believe that the opponent should have brought up many approximations in the theory, such as the dipole approximation, the ferromagnetic and linear response assumption, as well as the lack of mechanical damping in his report. On to the final verdict. The reporter accounted for different electromagnetic forces in the system, modeled the ferromagnetic response of the plate, and the opponent rightly pointed out the lack of independence variance of parameters. And for this, I believe that they did not answer the problem statement sufficiently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We move straight on to concluding remarks from the reporter, and you have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Jingtong Liu from Team China, and now I'll begin my conclusion for my report. So first of all, I would like to call back to some of the points mentioned by the opponent and the reviewer. First of all, I think the reviewer mentioned the point about the assumption for the permeability in the system. And I want to make clear that in our theory for the magnetization of the plate, we assume that in the in-plane direction, the permeability as going to infinity and retain the finite value for the permeability in the vertical direction. And we verified this result by computing the demagnetization factor for both directions. And furthermore, as to the problem with saturation, we have estimated the result and shown that only in the region very close to the magnets our saturation saturation probably have a significant effect. And furthermore, I think the opponent also mentioned the point about different configurations of magnets. Although we have included some discussions on the different configurations, I do believe that the point the opponent makes is can be considered and can be incorporated into the research in the future. As to the experiment, I think the opponent also mentioned the point about the fixed parameters and some of the deviation in the data. And as to this point, I want to make it clear that we have fixed parameters in the graphs we presented in the experiment, but the parameters aren't fixed between them. And I think the deviation is probably due to the point that it's probably due to the process of tracker tracking as well as the data processing. And as to the rolling without splitting process, I believe that although the opponent did make the point that we should investigate onto a more larger scale when verifying the rolling without splitting assumption, the results we obtained in our experiment already show that the assumption is quite well matched in most of the places we're working in the system. And that's all for my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're about to move on to questions from the jury, so if we could have reporter, opponent, and reviewer to the front. Can I request from the jury, we've got a lot of juror members, to try and keep brief questions leading to brief answers so that we can get to each question that you might have. And start now.
I have a question to the reviewer. You brought in that the rolling friction might have more influence than that was presented. Can you give a qualitative explanation why and how did you see it?
Okay, so I believe that the the rolling friction might be significant because the normal force of the plate on the vehicle might be significant. This is because the ferromagnetic plate will actually attract the vehicle downwards, which means the normal force will actually be increased. So because rolling friction scales with normal force, I believe this could actually be a significant source of damping.
Thank you.
Next. Georgi.
I have a question to the reporter. Can you go to the slide where you change the angle of the magnet's orientations?
Okay.
And I have basically the same questions as in physics 5-4. What is like? What happens like after 5 or 6? Like, does it drop down or?
Well, as to this,
think about it?
As to this problem, I want to make 2 points. The first point is that I think the trend might not be still the same, the same gradual trend we've shown here, because a larger change in the angle might cause a significantly larger gradient, and this might cause a larger acceleration in the system. And furthermore, another point I want to make is, as we have mentioned earlier in our discussion, we have fixed the length of the plate to be constant. So that actually provides a upper limit for the angle in the system. Because like in our experiment, we use the length to be like 300 millimeters and the base width to be like 100 or so.
Okay, thank you.
Very short question, slide 59, please. At the very end of the diagrams, what is the position of the magnets?
At the end of the diagrams, it's meant to be like the end of the plate, of the edge of the plate. But in our discussions, there might be like small errors due to like the processing of the data.
Thank you.
Yes.
Next. Kevin. Next.
Can you explain to the reporter, you said you used a steel wire distance meter.
Yes.
You've used steel.
So basically, I can show you the diagram here. Wait, sorry, very quick. So basically, the setup is kind of similar to this. So like here is like a lot of steel wires and coming out to this place. And so this setup can be stretched. And then this part is like a thin wire that can be burned to release the magnet. So the steel wire is actually and here is connected to the vehicle. So that's our setup. And in the middle here, we add a small break you can see from, like you can see here. Like that point is like the connecting point between the steel and the string we use.
Just to clarify, the steel gets pulled along through the magnets.
No, it won't. It's only like at the very edge here. Yes.
Okay, moving along. No, that's good.
Hello. To the reporter, is your eddy current time dependent? I wonder.
It is not set as it should be, but we simplify it to be like constant in the theory because it is actually a smaller scale.
And how did you measure it?
We only conduct experiments to it because we haven't. It's quite difficult to like experimentally verify the result in our theory.
I have a follow-up question to this. For the eddy currents, you need the conductivity and the susceptibility of the plate.
Yes.
How did you determine?
That's correct. And we obtain the results from literature. Yes, because like, sorry?
How did you determine the conductivity of the plate?
We obtain the results from literature because like when we're buying the plates, we verify like the standard of the plate with the manufacturer and obtain the results from literature.
Okay, so literature, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Slide number 14, please. Okay. If I remember right. The small f, what is...
the small f is like the friction, like the...
What kind of friction?
The static friction.
Sorry again?
Like the static friction under...
Static friction?
Yeah, under the rolling without,
thank you.
Without slipping, yes.
Okay, we've basically run out of time there, so we'll stop at that point, and I would ask you all to compile your grades. So just a reminder that our jury is one of the strengths of the tournament in that we have very able physicists, we've got very able physics teachers, and we've got research people who are still starting out. We've got all sorts of levels that are going to see different things. So don't expect everyone to go, that's exactly the same number. Which is why, after we have given marks, we get the variations explained. Okay, so without further ado, if we could compile your scorecard into the right position to show the mark for the reporter and raise up, mark for reporter. So we've got 6, 6, 6, 6, 7, 7, 6, and 6. It's not much of a variation. It's huge, it's huge. And then if we go straight on to our mark for our opponent, 9, 7, 8, 7, 8, 7, 8, 7. See, we had a 9 there. And finally, if we could hold up our scorecards for the reviewer, we have 6, 8, 7, 7, 8, 9, 8, and 7. Yes, got them? Okay. And all the competitors would know at this stage we sort of look at the variation. On our reporting team, we've got 2, 4, 6 6s and 2 7s. Martin, do you want to start off the process and say why a 6?
I thought you will keep me for the remaining roles because it's unavoidable for me. But anyway, okay. So I gave you 3.5 for the report and 1.75 for the discussion. Basically, what dragged you down on my side for the report was mainly the first and the last column. So the explanation of the phenomenon. I don't think we properly saw like what's happening, like the basic thing. Oh, it's nice to see. So if you would come to someone and say, hey, this is the experiment, so why it's accelerating, why it's going. And I also lack the proper definition of the parameters. Like it took me a while to understand all the parameters you are speaking about, like what are there actually. And in the last column, it's like you went so quick that there was no way for me to look on the x-axis, the y-axis, and then it was away. So like I couldn't read basically most of the content of the presentation while you were presenting it. So for the discussion, it was kind of okay, but nothing special.
Thanks.
Okay. Wanting someone on the other side, so we're looking for a 7.
Okay, I'm happy to speak to the 7. It's certainly one of the better reports that I've seen over the course of the competition, which was lovely. I can tell you've put a lot of hard work into it. I didn't think you quite got to answering the question of why there was the big discrepancy between the predicted and the measured values. And definitely some of your experimental methods that I had to ask about weren't as clear as I would like. I gave partial scores of obviously the 1 to start with, 4.2, 1.4, and obviously feeling generous today, rounded up to 7.
Thank you.
If it's a specific point, because we've got a lot to go through here.
Yes, I wanted to comment on a specific point because I judged the same problem in Physics Fight 4, and I gave you a 9. It was like all 9s and 8s, if I'm correct. So I wanted to comment you why I gave you a 6 now. Yeah. Like, there are 2 main reasons. First reason is like this is a final and the expectations are higher, so I don't have to stay consistent with my previous criteria. I have to stay consistent with my stricter criteria that I have in the final. And the second reason was during the Physics Fight 4, you were much better in defending your own solution in discussion. Now you were not able to get like much points from you. Like I think I put down 0.75 for you defending in discussion. So that were the 2 main points why I went down lower. Thank you.
Thank you. And that certainly is relevant if you've seen something before to explain the difference. As pointed out, they're starting again with this. It's not them matching everything they've done before. This is a special one-off. Going on to our opponents, we had 7 and 9. Sure. Do you want to do a 7? Thank you, Simon.
Yes, sure. I thought it was a very good opposition, basically. I gave you partial grade of 1.2 for the questions asked, 2 points for the opposition speech, and 3 points for the discussion. I think the only thing that didn't let me give you even more points was that sometimes I felt you were sticking a bit to minor points and not the most relevant ones, but a lot of the points you discussed were actually very relevant, so overall it was a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, coming back to Martin. You knew you were coming. A 9.
Yeah, that's very unusual for me to explain the higher edge. So I had 1.75 for questions, 3 points for the speech, and 3 points for the discussion. I think there were many things which were unclear for me. But still, I think you managed to clear out some of them. It probably, like, within the time given to you, it would be very hard to clear all of them. Very selfish to say, probably, like, you followed a very similar pathway I would have followed being on your position. So that's why I appreciated, like, especially the questions, but then also like the timing between, like, asking the questions, reacting on what you ask and learn on the speech, and then continuing on the topics. Even if I don't agree with all of them, I agree with most of them, and I like the consistency of the opposition. So you had your position and you defended your position during the whole stage.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to review.
Okay, so unlike for the opponent, I was not that much impressed from the questions, because I think they were like firing there and back without a very clear focus on where you're actually heading. So I gave you 1 point for the for questions. I gave you 1.75 for the 2 points for the review of the report, 1.25 for the review of the opposition, 1.5 for the discussion. This was the stronger part, but I had to subtract you 0.5 point for the missed points, because I'm not sure for the experiment, like, to what extent the air drag and the rolling friction is valid, but is actually important. But from what he showed and from the experimental data, it didn't look like there are inconsistencies. And I can imagine, and I could believe, that actually the air drag and the rolling friction is not the relevant parameter. If this would be brought by the opponent, okay, I would take it as an effective attack, but for the reviewer, this was something I deemed as not very appropriate, because this was definitely not like a major point of failure in the presentation. So that's brought me down from maybe a 7, which would be the thing I would normally give without the score sheet, to the 6 there.
Okay, and final one for today is bringing me back to Samuel. And a 9?
Yeah, so to me it was the best review I've seen so far, so that's why I gave a high grade. I also felt that some of the points you mentioned were stressed a bit too much, maybe. Several times you pointed out the lack of qualitative explanation, but that was a valid point. I had actually similar partial grades as Martin, always a bit higher, obviously. So I gave you 1.5 for the questions asked, 2.5 for the review of the report, 1.5 for review of opposition, 1.5 for the discussion analysis, and I gave you plus 0.5 for the missed points. I also felt that the mechanical damping isn't that much of an issue, but the other two things you mentioned, in my opinion, were valid points. So that's why I gave you plus 0.5. And not plus 1 in the end, because I took away something for the rolling friction. Yeah, but I felt it was a very good review overall.
Okay, thank you. Brief, because otherwise we don't get a break.
Yeah, I want to briefly add about both opposition and review. Basically, I agree with Martin. I liked opposition more than review, but I gave you both 7s, and that's because of the 2 facts. The main point is that I believe that the most important thing also in this presentation was to, like, somehow find an optimization of the problem, and you did not talk about it much more. So I punished opponent more according to my criteria for that than the reviewer. So that's why I ended up with that. Otherwise, like, it was a very good opposition.
Okay, so I would like at this stage to say that in the first round of a final, the marks are relatively consistent, which is a very nice sign that people were finding things that were strong and worth rewarding. Can I just, at this stage, we're about to go on a break, congratulate our three teams for the first stage, and please... Start.
Hyun-won from South Korea. Today, I'll be reporting problem number 5, elastic wave dynamics. Firstly, let's look at the problem statement. When a ball and a rubber band is placed like the presentation, twisted multiple times and released, standing waves form on the rubber band. We have to investigate the wave and its parameter dependency. Relevant parameters are initial twist, band length, ball radius, ball mass, and elastic properties. This is the overview of my presentation. Firstly, let's look at the setup and some observations. Here is the main setup. The ball was released with the machinery to avoid unwanted human error. A gyro sensor was installed in the ball for accurate tracking of angular velocity. The center of mass of the ball was also checked. With the following equations, tracking error was calibrated. The band was binarized to ensure accurate tracking. Then, the shape was done a space DST to accurately determine the mode number over time. Now, let's move on to our key observations. When there are 30 twists, the phenomenon is unclear. When we twist more, we see higher modes. Thus, we can conclude that initial potential energy is very important to the motion. We firstly, to check whether what factor is actually influencing this phenomenon, we check for constant angular velocity setup. And when constant angular velocity was applied, we can see that higher modes are observed. Thus, we can say that angular velocity is a determining factor in this motion. Now, we move on to some further observations. We can see that the wave structure is confined to 2D plane, and also oscillatory observation that we see in lab frame was due to rotation. Thus, two important observations were made, and now we move on to our qualitative analysis. When we twist the ball multiple times and release, basically the initial perturbation of the system creates initial excitation. And when angular velocity of the system increases, it would increase the amplitude of vibration. Why? This is because if we draw an equation of motion for a microscopic element of a band, we can draw a force balance for a microscopic component of the mode in the rotating frame of reference. Now, what happens if angular speed increases further? Then the amplitude will keep growing. But then centripetal forces will reach a point where it can no longer process outwards due to the mass and the length condition of the rubber band. Thus, as angular velocity further increases, the band transforms into two-mode shape. Switching to two-mode shape has two benefits to the system. Firstly, the radius will decrease initially. And second, because the ball has a high mass, the radius will decrease initially. And secondly, the angle of tension becomes more favorable in countering the centripetal force. Thus, the band forms a wave shape as it increases in angular velocity. And as the wave shape spins in lab frame, it seems like a standing wave is formed on the string. Thus, we have done a qualitative explanation for this phenomenon. Now, we will move on to the quantitative investigation. First, we will investigate mode boundaries. For a component of the band, we can write the equation of motion as following. We use Taylor expansion to simplify the equation and set boundary conditions for the rod and the ball, trying to solve this analytically. We decompose the wave formed with the equation of the motion to different modes. Then, for each mode, we write equation of motion that represent the dynamic stability and centrifugal instability in the qualitative. We use this to identify the natural frequency of each mode. When natural frequency reaches 0, the mode amplitude will start on exponential growth, and thus we can observe the mode. We can get an analytical solution for the boundary of when the mode appears, as represented as follows. The elasticity of rubber band was taken account as a factor that is differentiating the length of the band. When checking for the length of the band, we also accounted for hysteresis by checking both loading and unloading condition. If we map the mode boundaries for angular velocity and ball mass, it would look like as the picture. Now, to verify this mode boundary, we conduct another experiment. Here, the system is rotated with constant angular speed instead of using the twist as the source for the angular speed. And if we map the result of this new setup in the map, we can see an agreement between theory and experiment in the region. Although there are some errors, we believe this is because of the nonlinear elasticity that we have not fully accounted for. Thus, mode boundaries were validated with experiment. Now we move on to modeling the twisted elastic string, the situation that is given in the problem. The potential energy of the system can be written as follows. Using the potential energy formula, we derive torque and tension, which we use to write z motion, equation of motion, and angular equation of motion. Tension change by increment and tension change by revolution was accounted. This also proves that the quantitative theory about the potential energy before. We use the following setup to measure the moment of inertia. With this, we run a Python numerical analysis about the position and the angular velocity of the ball. The numerical simulation gives the theory data above. And above the graph, we plot the experimental data. We have shown a quantitative agreement between theory and data. And with this, by knowing the time omega relation and mode boundaries, we know when each mode will become dominant. If we plot this data into the graph where x-axis is the number of revolution and y-axis is time, we plot a fear graph for where mode boundaries are. If we experimentally dot the most dominant mode shift timing, we can see a quantitative agreement in the lower modes. However, in the higher modes, we see a significant deviation between theory and experiment. Thus, theory-experiment agreement was confirmed in lower modes. Before we move on to deviation analysis, we first test for multiple parameters. This is when the length is longer because there is room for more instability, higher modes appear faster. For shorter lengths, the transition becomes slower. For increasing mass, higher modes appear later. Thus, we have finished testing for multiple parameters. Now, we move on to explaining mode transfers. Back at the graph, we saw a very clear disagreement in the higher modes, and we try investigating this deviation. Why do you think the deviation occurs? This is because of the occurrence of mixed regions. When a ball transfers between modes, the band experiences unstable region where no clear mode appears. Here, no single mode is dominant. Thus, unstable region, the mixed region is more, and also mixed region is more prevalent in transition between higher modes. Thus, we theorize this will be the cause of error that we see in the higher modes. To resolve this, we look more closely into angular velocity. Angular velocity can be expressed as the sum of two harmonic oscillations. This is because of the changing y position of the ball coupled with the elasticity of the rubber band, which rapidly changes the tension, creating an oscillation. Angular speed can be written as follows, including the FFT result. And here, because dominant mixed modes occur in certain conditions and that two angular velocity peak occurs, we can see this phenomenon as a form of parametric equation. It's parametric excitation. Thus, the system is expected to exhibit parametric excitation. Thus, we have to model this instability. We use the equation of motion and newly obtained rotational speed. We perform Fourier analysis to write for the parametric excitation for each mode. When we define time variance tau, a time variable, a delta, the number that characterizes natural frequency, and omega, we can write a parametric excitation in the form of Matthew equation. Because the equation is about each mode, each of the modes will have different Matthew equations with its own damping. We draw an Arnold's tongue with this equation. Variable delta means restoring force, while variable epsilon encompasses parametric excitation strength. Because we have different damping for each mode, we can obtain different stability tongue for different modes. Because stability tongues of the modes is different for each mode, every mode will have a different growth rate, depending on delta and epsilon. Thus, we use Floquet theory to calculate the growth rate of each mode. To model the growth rate of each mode, we use Matthew equation with damping, state vector, and matrix to represent growth. We use fundamental matrix and monotony matrix to signify a growth over a period. For different growth rate, we can obtain growth rates of each mode in this parametric space. If we put all these diagrams one upon another, we can derive a map where we show when each modes are dominant. For white part, mixed modes appear. When the band is in a stable region in 4 modes, we can observe a very clear 4-mode standing wave at the line. And also, as the angular velocity decreases, the state of it moves, basically experiencing the mixed region. With this, we can actually plot the graph for mode growth, and we can differentiate the case where the mode is unchanged after experiencing mixed region, and also the mode changing after experiencing mode region. And by this, if we account for this unstable region, then we can see that the theory and experiment agrees very well. Thus, the error is successfully investigated. Now, for further insights, we look at the defining amplitude. And in mixed region, we can know that we cannot definitely define a one stable amplitude. However, in the dominant region, we can define one stable amplitude. Thus, we binarize the line to track for the amplitude. And in the rotating frame, we believe that the vibrating amplitude will experience this type of graph. And when we plot the experiment and theory with this amplitude change in the lab frame, we can see a very good agreement between theory and experiment. Thus, we have investigated for both mode and amplitude. Now we move on to the summary. We use centrifugal force to serve as an initial excitation, and we use the initial increasing angular velocity as the main thing that caused this phenomenon. Critical angular speed was used to determine for mode transfer. Angular speed in elastic string was tracked to model mode transfers. Stable experimental setup without human error was employed, and tracking angular velocity using gyrosensor was done. Critical angular speed determines mode transfer, and angular speed in elastic string was tracked to model mode transfers. And stability was analyzed, mode growth was included in theory, and experimental verification of it was complete. Thus, we can say that all tasks is fulfilled. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we move straight on to questions from the opponent, and you have 2 minutes.
So thank you, reporter, for your insightful report. I would like to move on to my clarifying questions. So may I ask if you assume that the ball is always at a node?
I'm sorry?
Do you assume that the ball is always at a node?
Yes, we assumed it.
Okay, and do you have any do you have any justification for that?
We have it in the appendix, and I think we could discuss it later during the discussion.
Okay, thank you. So could you go to slide 24? May I ask if you assume that the motions of the ball and the wave are decoupled?
We basically thought that the angular velocity of the ball and the rotating string was indeed identical looking at our observation from the top.
So you solved them separately, the motion of the bob and the string itself?
So we've accounted for the angular velocity of the ball and we applied it to the string.
Okay, I see. So may I ask for slide 28, how many times do you repeat each experiment to obtain your experimental points for the phase plot?
We only did it one time.
And did you ensure in any way that your experiments are repeatable, like they give the same number of modes when you run it many times?
No, the experiment was only conducted one time.
Okay, thank you. May I ask for slide 34, what are the constant CL and C data? Or slide 34? 34. 34.
34. Okay.
Yeah. So
I remember it was the damping constants and it was fitted.
Oh, so you fitted the damping constants?
Yes, we did, because it was very hard to measure the damping constants.
Okay, and may I ask, how did you model viscoelastic damping in the string?
Viscoelastic damping was assumed negligible.
Okay, and did you observe that the motion of the string is always in the plane?
Yes.
Even in the transient phase?
For transient phase, we believe that it was very hard to observe a theory, and also this problem basically requires us to model standing waves.
Having to stop you there, you have 3 minutes for preparation. The reporter may sit down to present, and then the rest is added on to discussion time. Good luck.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am Tsai Xingze from Team Singapore, and I'll be opposing problem number 5, elastic wave dynamics. First, a summary of the report. The reporter has managed to explain the growth of the standing wave of the modes depending on the angular velocity using the centrifugal force, and he has managed to model the string using a linear elasticity, as well as model the bob using an analytic theory and Matthews equation. Lastly, the reporter has investigated the dependence of the mode number on both the string length as well as the number of initial twists given to the string. Now, I will move on to the strengths and areas of improvement for the report, starting with the strengths. Firstly, I commend the reporter for having a good experimental setup, where he used a claw to release the bob to ensure that it has no initial linear velocity, and also used a gyro sensor in order to collect the pulse of the bob, including the spin as well as the other important angles of the bob. And I think that this is important because this allows him to accurately determine, for instance, the spin of the bob, which may be very hard to track using a video since it is rotating very fast. Moving on, the reporter also had some experimental justification for some effects, such as the slow motion of the string to justify the 2D planar assumption in the steady state. So I believe that this is important as he has managed to justify some of the assumptions in his theory, such as the 2D planar assumption, which may not be valid in, say, the transient case. Lastly, the reporter has managed to construct a simple analytical theory to describe the motion of the bob as well as the standing waveform on the string. So he has managed to predict the mode on the string based on the angular velocity of the bob, and has used the Matthews equation to derive the stability terms. And I believe that this is important as it allows some physical insight to be drawn, since he has managed to propose a very simple analytical theory for such a difficult problem. However, I would like to now move on to some areas of improvement for the report. Firstly, I would like to point out that the reporter had an incomplete qualitative explanation for the bob. For instance, the reporter did not fully explain why the vertical orientation of the bob is unstable. And I believe that it is important to analyze the forces and torques acting on the bob to show how it will eventually, starting from vertical orientation, it will eventually move away and start to have a high nutation angle due to the centrifugal force acting on the bob in the rotating frame of reference. He also did not mention how the motion of the bob as well as the standing waves on the string are coupled, and has simply solved for the motion of the bob first and then used it to solve for the motion of the string. So he has essentially decoupled it. In addition, the reporter had an unclear theoretical workflow where it did not really clarify the coupling of the bob and the string, as I've mentioned earlier, and he did not have a quantitative metric to quantify how he distinguished between different modes. So I believe that it is not reasonable to assume that the bob is always at the node, especially if it has a non-zero nutation angle, because in that case then it might be, say, at some other point instead of being at a node. And in this case, he'll need to have some metric to distinguish between different modes, because the wave could be, say, between mode 2 and mode 3. Moving on, the reporter has some unjustified assumptions in the theory, such as a linear elastic model used, as well as assuming that the talk about the symmetry axis of the bob is linear. So I do not believe that this is valid, because he has used an elastic string, and the stretching curve of such a string may not be perfectly linear. So I could propose to the reporter that he could have characterized the full stretching curve and could have perhaps fitted a model such as the Mooney-Riflin model, or more simply fitted a polynomial to obtain the stretching curve at any stretch of the string. Lastly, the reporter had an unclear characterization of important parameters such as the Young's modulus as well as the shear modulus of the bob. And I believe that he could have done so by, say, attaching masses to the string and measuring how much it stretches. And this could allow him to obtain the Young's modulus. And then as for the shear modulus, he could apply a torque and see how much it deforms as well. And there was also some fitted parameters in the reporter's theory, such as the drag coefficients, which I believe that he could have characterized by simply making it swing and then fitting the decay profile to obtain the modulus. The damping coefficients. So now I would like to move on to the discussion. So could I ask the reporter to connect to the screen? So I would like to start by clarifying your qualitative explanation. So I realized that in your qualitative explanation, you did not really explain why the motion of the vertical orientation of the bob is unstable. So the bob starts as such, is in a vertical orientation. So can you explain why the bob will tend to sort of nutate and cause the standing wave on the string?
Can you explain it like one more time?
Oh, okay. So you agree that that the bob starts from at a vertical orientation.
Yes.
So why is there a tendency when it untwists for the bob to start to form a wave on the string?
So as I've explained, even though the ball is a very big mass, it basically the ball and the string basically has to have an initial perturbation.
Yes.
And since there is an initial perturbation, and looking at this in the perspective of the elastic band, there basically would be the centrifugal force, the centrifugal force that depends on the angular velocity. Yes. And I believe that this angular velocity would actually make the amplitude grow.
Can we make sure that you allow the drawings to be seen?
Okay, so I actually would like to slightly disagree with you, because I think that we should be analyzing the motion of the bob instead of just the motion of the string. Because in doing such, you're sort of assuming that your bob stays in this position, which we see that it doesn't really stay in this position in your experimental video. It will start to mutate and precess. So I believe that a possible explanation is that if we analyze the motion, if we zoom in on the bob itself, we will see that, let's say that this is the symmetry axis of the bob, and this is the string. So there will be some initial nutation angle due to a perturbation.
We believe that since like these initial these angles can act as the perturbation. However, we believe that it was since the properties of the elastic spring and the ball, we believe that it was very hard to actually quantitatively model the initial perturbation.
I'm just providing a qualitative explanation for why the vertical orientation of the bob is unstable. So I'm just going to provide a qualitative explanation.
Yes.
So I believe that it is because the bob has some initial nutation angle. So what happens now is that if we consider the torsional torque from the string itself, we see that there's a component along the symmetry axis and a component perpendicular to the symmetry axis. However, if we analyze this component from the symmetry axis, since the bob already has some angular momentum, it will cause it to precess. Do you agree?
What do you mean? Can you please explain about what the meaning of is the precession?
Okay, so because the angular momentum of the bob points in this direction, yes, and there's a torsional torque pointing in this direction,
yes,
it will cause the angular momentum vector to precess, which explains why the bob starts to precess even though it initially is vertical. Do you think that this is a possible explanation?
Yes, we believe this could be a possible explanation of the start of the motion.
Yes, so I believe that now that we have explained how it precesses, now as the bob is precessing, there will be a centrifugal force acting outwards from the bob, which will then increase the nutation angle. And then this will drive it in a positive feedback loop, causing both the precession and the nutation to increase. So I think that this is a more complete and a more thorough qualitative explanation for why the bob will start to precess and nutate even though it starts in the vertical orientation. Do you think that this is a possible explanation?
Yes, this would be a possible explanation, and I really like that the opponent have suggested it. However, we believe that what we are looking at here at the most is the dynamics of the wave and why the standing wave and why a lot of mode basically appears. So I would like to agree in this point with the opponent.
So to summarize this point, the reporter and I have agreed that a better qualitative explanation for why the vertical orientation of the bob is unstable is to consider the torques acting on the bob instead of on the string itself, since I believe that this will make some unphysical assumptions on the bob, such as it having no nutation angle throughout the entire experiment. So now I would like to move on to my second point, which is on your quantitative model. So could you just briefly go back to the slide on the model? So could I just clarify, how did you solve for the motions of the bob and the string? So do you solve the motion of the bob first and then use it to solve the motion of the string?
Yes, we did.
So essentially you're decoupling the motions because you're solving one before the other.
Yes, but however, we actually calculated the torque and the tension that is applied by the elastic band to the ball. So we believe that we have accounted enough for the effect of the elastic band that actually rotates the ball.
Okay, but then in this case, you won't be... So you have explained how the string affects the bob, but do you manage to explain how the bob affects the string? The other direction, because you're solving it in one way and not the other.
We believe that compared to the ball, which is mentioned in the problem as a very big mass, we believe that the string has a very small mass, and the effect that the ball has to the string is basically more negligible than the effect of the string that has on the ball.
I would actually like to disagree with you, because I believe that the frequency and the amplitude of the waveform on a string is directly related to both the nutation as well as the precession of the bob. Because if you were to sort of imagine that the bob has some nutation angle, you will notice that this nutation angle actually directly determines the amplitude of the waveform on the string. Because if you have a smaller nutation angle, then the amplitude will be smaller. And if you have a larger nutation angle, then the amplitude of the waves will be larger. And similarly,
so we basically like modeled the tension and the force that the elastic band is applying on the ball.
Yes, but I think that you should have solved them together in one coupled system, because in this case, I don't think that it's really better to decouple it, since the motion of the string will affect the bob as well because of the tension force that it applies, and the motion of the bob will affect the string because it acts as a boundary condition, which will then determine the amplitude and frequency of the sending waves formed on the string.
Yes, but look at the equation, we can see that we have basically modeled like the tension of the torque, the properties of the band that affects that basically like affects the ball. So we believe that we did a sufficient modeling, and we also saw like a good agreement between theory and experiment. So I believe that our modeling was sufficient.
Okay, so to summarize this point, the reporter and I have disagreed on whether his theoretical model is valid, so I do not believe that it is valid, as in this model, he was unable to account for how the bob itself acts as a boundary condition that will eventually determine the shape of the string. So I suggested that the reporter could have perhaps solved it as a coupled system, and this will allow him to enforce boundary conditions that the bob applies on the string. So now I would like to move on to my next point, which is on your damping coefficients. So may I ask if, to clarify, you fitted your damping coefficients, am I correct?
Yes, it is correct.
But may I ask why you didn't sort of characterize it, such as, for instance, just placing it on the string and letting it oscillate back and forth, and then you can fit the decay profile to obtain the damping coefficient? Do you think that this is possible?
Basically, the damping that I am talking about is the translational damping when the ball moves in the z motion axis, and the angular damping when the ball basically rotates. So I believe that this situation would have basically a different physics as these two cases. So we believe that it was more physically accurate to try to fit it to the experimental data.
Okay, I would like to slightly disagree with you, because I believe that by fitting so many parameters, you sort of extract from the physical insight that we can obtain from your model, because we will not be too sure whether, say, your fitted damping coefficients could account for some other effect which your model has missed. So I would like to propose that instead of fitting it, you could, say, measure the translational drag by simply letting it oscillate up and down and measuring the decay profile, and then for the rotational drag, you sort of twist it and once again measure how the angular displacement decays with time. And then this will allow you to obtain the coefficients, the damping coefficients. So do you think that this is a better way to obtain the coefficients in your model?
No, but we believe that still the fitting is the best way, because, but we still believe that the fitting is the best way, because tracking would like have the problems that I've mentioned.
Okay, thank you. So to summarize this point, the reporter and I have discussed about the fitting of its parameters. So I've pointed out that by fitting the parameters, he will sort of reduce the physical insight in his model, and suggested that he could characterize it by simply fitting the decay profile of the ball. So now I would like to move on to my last point, which is on the stress strain curve in your model. So may I ask, for your stress strain curve, do you assume that it was linear?
Are you talking about this curve?
No, your stress strain curve.
So when I was constructing that analytical model, because the main purpose of the model was to be analytic, I only accounted for the change of the length due to the elasticity, and I have confirmed through the mode boundary experiments that this was enough. But however, when we were solving numerically about the motion, we both analyzed the increment tension relationship and revolution tension relationship.
So do you have a curve showing your stress strain curve? For example, how much it deforms when you apply a given force on it? Do you have any graph to show it?
Yes. Basically the tension that we wanted to model was the form in that form, so I don't specifically like have a stress strain curve.
Okay, so I actually believe that you could have, say, obtained your stress strain curve, and I believe that since the problem statement asked us to investigate a rubber which is specifically hyperelastic, I think that a linear stress strain curve model would not be accurate, and I think that you have to use a more complicated model, because we know that for rubber, it is hyperelastic, and so the stress strain curve is sort of curved, and it's not really linear. So to summarize this point, the reporter
I want to mention something, because yes, we agree that increment tension graph has a linear form, but because we accounted for various effects of the elastic strain in the revolution tension graph, we believe that the elastic properties of the band was sufficiently accounted.
You there. Thank you very much. We move straight on for the summary. Yes.
Okay. We didn't take it. So to summarize the oppose, I have first qualitatively discussed about the actual explanation for why the vertical orientation of the bob is unstable. So I've proposed that the reason for this instability is that when the bob has some initial nutation, then the perpendicular component of the torsional torque will cause it to start precessing, which will then produce a centrifugal force, causing it to increase in nutation, which explains why the vertical orientation of the bob is unstable. Moving on, the reporter and I have discussed about his theoretical workflow, where I mentioned that he should have coupled the entire motion of the string as well as the bob, because the bob acts as a boundary condition which will directly affect the wave profile formed by the string. Moving on, the reporter and I have discussed about his characterization of certain parameters such as the drag and the drag coefficients, where he mentioned that he has fitted it, and I proposed that he could have fitted the decay profile to characterize it instead. And lastly, we have also discussed about the stretching curve, where I said that he should have fitted a nonlinear stretching curve since rubber is hyperelastic. So, due to the oversimplifying assumptions in the theoretical model of the reporter, I believe that he has not fully answered the problem statement.
Okay,
Thank
having
you.
to stop you there, we move straight on to questions from the reviewer.
Okay, thanks for the excellent discussion. And I have some questions for both sides. So to the reporter, your model is based on linear wave equation. And did you perform an experimental test to prove that the band is linear?
No, that was like one of our assumptions.
Okay. Did you consider the axial movement?
I'm sorry?
Axial movement. Vertical movement.
Yes, we considered vertical movement of the ball, which is explained
Okay, thank
in
you.
this graph.
We can discuss it after. And for the opponent, you challenged the reporter's linear assumption. And what specific nonlinear constitutive effect did you expect to see?
So I would expect something like how the stretching curve would be nonlinear. So when you stretch it too much, it may diverge from being linear. So I think that you could model it using a nonlinear model, such as the New-Hookland or the Mooney-Riflin model.
Okay, so you think a nonlinear model should be applied?
Yes, because rubber is hyperelastic.
Okay, thank you. You argue that the reporter did not verify linear elasticity. And what concrete experimental method do you propose?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
You argue that the reporter did not verify the linear elasticity. And what experimental method you propose to use?
So I think that what he could have done is that he could have hung weights on it, and then this will apply a force, and then measure how much it stretches.
Okay.
And then he will fit this to this.
Okay, so to the reporter, in your page 30, you have like C theta 1 and C theta 2 represent. So do they represent the damping of the system?
Yes, C represents the translational and the angular damping.
Okay, so what types of damping are they included?
Like the damping in the Z motion and angular damping was included.
Okay, so to the opponent, what types of damping you think should be considered?
Okay, so I think the most important damping is the viscoelastic damping in the string, and then the less important ones will be the translational and the rotational drag by the ball.
Okay, so in page 44 of the report, you have a sensor which may cause uneven mass distribution. And did you verify this effect on the measurement of moments of inertia that you verified in your following experiment?
So do you mean if I have independently checked for moment of inertia and the center of mass?
Yeah, we mean that the sensor inside the ball may cause some uneven mass distribution.
We checked for that the center of mass is located at the middle of the ball and that the moment of inertia was basically measured independently.
Okay, so to the opponent, do you think it will cause some effect to the measurement of moment of inertia?
Sorry?
Like the sensor they put inside their ball, do you think it will have some effect on the measurement of moment of inertia?
Yes, but if he measured the moment of inertia with the sensor, then it will be accurate.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay, moving on to preparation.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Yuan Weixia from Team China. Now I'll begin my reviewer report on problem 5, elastic wave dynamics. So firstly, the reporter theoretically explained the physical nature of formation of waves and built theoretical analysis on mode transfers measured the centrifugal force. They quantitatively investigate parameters and conducted experimental exploration and fitted results. So experimentally, they use elastic band, ball, and control the motor to release. And they verify the critical angular speed, frequencies, amplitude, and modes. And they provide mode boundaries and mode analysis. So the report has a lot of merits, like they explain the physical extent of standing wave with force analysis, they introduce appropriate model to calculate the frequency, amplitude, and mode, and experimentally, they have validation of theoretical predictions, and they accounted for the high order error and different order dominance. But it also have a lot of concerns. They failed to account for the vertical oscillation and horizontal DOF in the system, which is possible coupling and discussed. And they did not account for the distinction between linear and nonlinear phenomenon, and the influence of parameters in initial conditions on the industrial mode is not clearly presented. And experimentally, they did not justify the assumption that the system is within linear elastic range and did not guarantee the uniform torsion. And they did not account for the y-direction displacement. So for the opponent, they provide physical insight on the phenomenon of precession and the couple of some DOF in the system, and they noticed the lack of qualitative explanation on the phenomena such as instability and different modes. However, they failed to notice the lack of consideration on coupling between the rotational, vertical, and horizontal DOF, and they lack discussion on how the parameters affect the mode change in the system. Experimentally, they did not provide a clear method to improve the reporter's linear model, and they did not clarify on the effect of different parameters on dependent variables. And to discussion analysis, so the problem proposed by the opponent is the motion of law is the physical essence of instability instead of a stream. And actually, we agree with the opponent, and we think the effect of axial movement on the stability should be considered. And the opponent proposes that the decoupled solving cannot fully explain the coupling between the ball and the string. And the reporter say that the equation illustrates how the ball affects the string. So we think that they should consider the coupling between the two objects, and the coupled solving is invalid. And also, the fitting parameters cannot be explained from physical insight as proposed by the opponent. And the reporter says that the tracking using EXP is hard to achieve. And we think that they should consider the limitation of the experiment and fitting parameters. So actually, in the discussion, both sides ignored the gravity-induced spatiality in homogeneous tension field. Like both teams neglected the fact that the gravity will introduce a vertical tension gradient where tension is maximum at the top and minimum at the bottom, making the wave speed spatially non-uniform. And the reporter assumed that the gravity of the rubber band can be ignored, but they did not provide any validation. And secondly, both sides ignored the axial extension and contraction, like the large angle twisting causes severe longitudinal shortening of the rubber band, which exponentially spikes the axial tension. And the third point is that both sides idealize the upper support as a perfectly rigid fixed boundary, and they overlook the friction between the soft rubber band and the rigid metal clamp. And here are our suggestions. So for the reporter, we suggest they perform static twisting tests under unreleased conditions, and they should consider axial movement of the system, also prevent vibrations of the system structure or horizontal displacement. And for the opponent, I would highly suggest a shift from purely criticism to constructive scientific guidance. Like throughout the debate, you correctly identified that the reporter did not verify linear elasticity, but you did not push the discussion far enough. So that is my review report. Thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you. And we move straight on to concluding remarks from the reporter.
Firstly, I'll talk about the concerns that was raised by the opponent. The opponent has questioned us whether we have assumed whether the ball was always at the node, and yes, we believe that by observing if in the top view, we believe that the assuming that the ball is in the node is valid. And also the opponent have questioned us about the angular velocity of the ball and the string is assumed the same. And yes, we believe through the preliminary observations, we have shown you that the angular position of the ball and the string basically rotates with the same phase. Thus, we believe that we had enough justification about the motion of the angular motion of the ball and the string. Also, the opposition has questioned why whether the position of the ball is unstable. And yes, we believe that we have sufficiently mentioned in the qualitative analysis that perturbation will be the initial factor that is causing the motion. However, we believe that the question requires us to discuss more about the mode and why the standing waves actually form in the band. So we believe that the initial effect was initial effect was prioritized less, and we had an agreement in the physical insight. And about the quantitative analysis, we want to say that the string's mass is negligible compared to the ball. And about the measuring of the drag, we believe that the fitting was the best possible method. And about the concerns raised by the opponent, we have assumed that the tension increment relationship is linear because the ball does not oscillate rapidly in the z-axis motion. And also, the vertical movement was accounted, as we can see in page 857, and also in the significance of damping in Z motion and the angular motion was accounted. And also, for trying to measure the center effect, the motion of inertia and the center of mass of the ball was controlled and measured.
I have to stop you there, thank you. Okay, we are moving on to questions from the jury. And you go first.
Thank you. So I have a question to the reporter. What was the result of introducing a Mathieu equation? Like, did you get a growth rate or like a condition when the parametric instability happens or not?
Yes, so I introduced Mathieu equation because my formal quantitative model basically assumes quasi-static. However, we have observed that mixed modes appear when transitioning from different modes. So we use Mathieu equation to account for the appearance of these mixed modes.
Okay, thank you. Like, put up the slides as well, please. So.
Yes.
Moving on. Next question.
Yeah, slide number 31. I'd need the slides to pose the question.
Yes.
Can someone from the team help, maybe?
No.
Okay, it's there. So in the formula up there, it seems that the quadratic term should be 0 for 0 rotations, while on the graph on the right hand side, it seems you're fitting it with the minimum around 40 revolutions. So can you comment on that one?
Because when twisting, the initial displacement of length was observed, and we accounted it when fitting for the tension change by revolution.
Sorry, I didn't get that one.
Yes.
So the formula says it's phi squared, and then why the minimum tension is with non-zero revolutions?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
So the formula says it's 1/2 k bar theta squared. This is minimum for theta equals 0. This is minimum revolutions. But looking on the right-hand side graph, the minimum of the blue line is with like 40 revolutions. So theta being like 200 something. So why is the minimum there different than in the minimum in the formula?
This is because when we were twisting the string, there basically was like an initial displacement. So we cannot say that like the initial displacement was like completely 0. So the minimal value should be like 0.
Thank you. I think you've answered.
Pretty much the follow-up question for the left-hand side diagram. If the increment would be 0, what would be the tension according to the blue line?
When the increment is 0?
Yeah.
When the increment is 0 and there is no revolution, then the tension would like also be 0.
But according to the line, does it says us the same?
This is because we only fitted the things for where our experimental like increments. So we believe that we have accounted for the elastic model.
Further along, any questions? No questions?
Show me the Mathieu equations.
Yes.
The solution.
Yes. Do you want the graph with the tongues?
Okay, if you're happy, then slide number 28.
Yes.
Slide 28.
Slide 28. Yes.
Okay, so So here you show like very sharp regions from the theory between the individual nodes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But then later on you said that there are some like intermediate regions or something like that. So how much this graph would change, or how did it change if you incorporated this intermediate? How broad are the intermediate regions in that graph?
Yes, so this is basically for the constant angular velocity setup, and because in the constant angular velocity, only like a single mode wave can be observed. In this setup, it has like a sharp boundary.
So for constant angular velocity, there is always just one single mode. You never see a superposition of more modes with a given velocity.
Yes, that was what we experientially observed.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, we've only a few seconds left, so let's progress to our marking. Okay, it would appear that we have got to our marks, so we will get you to prepare your mark for the reporter and then show your mark for the reporter. Now, and we start with 6, 7, 6, 7, 6, 7. Sorry, 7, 7. And then we go for the review. I wanted coffee. All right, opponent's mark. So preparing opponent's mark. Holding up now. We have a 9, an 8, an 8, a 6, an 8, an 8, a 7, and a 7. And final mark for the review team. The review, we have 5, 9, 7, 7, 8, 7, 6, 7. Okay, the easiest one with limited variation, since they're all 6s and 7s. Who haven't we had? Yeah, okay.
So feedback to the report, I guess.
To the report.
So thank you very much for the nice presentation. I really liked the way of the presentation. Was the basic explanation was pretty strong. Also the theoretical model was more or less to follow. Very nice experimental results. So you're going to see that later on in my score sheet. What I did not like that much, that was the science communication. Basically, only one reference was cited from my point of view properly, and all the rest was just put it on the end, which shows me, did not show me where was your special work and what was cited by someone else. And then meanwhile, I had to reduce the scores and the theoretical model according to the slide 30-31, which made me some questions. And also in the discussion, I had to realize that even though the basic explanation was very nice, it still could have been a bit better. But all together was a very nice report. Thank you.
And we've got number 7s, perhaps. Number Juror 7 here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So for the report, I like that you started with the wave equation when we try to solve the wave phenomena like this. And another plus for me is you try to obtain the critical angular velocity, even though I'm still have questions about, because sometimes you use the case of the the constant angular velocity, and then apply it to the non-static one. I'm still have doubt about that, but my partial grade is 4 for the report, 1.5 for the discussion, so that goes to 6.5, but the overall is good, so I round up to 7.
Fantastic, thank you. If we go to our opponent, we start with the lower mark.
Okay, so to explain the lower grade for the opposition, I need to first outline what was most important in the report for me. In the report for me, the most peculiar thing was the Mathieu equation and how it can be used to like characterize that instability and get a better match, etc. I think it's also a very nice like scientific novelty. I am not sure because I was not able to get much from the jury questions, but I think that is very interesting, and I think that is the most peculiar part of the report. So you not like going over that and not doing it during the discussion, like you only briefly mentioned it into your speech that the reporter had Mathieu equation basically, which did not bring anything much. We already heard that. So that's one of the reasons I went slightly lower, and also like I think I was still low for the opposition because at the previous round I gave a 7 and I explained the low grade. So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And going to the higher grade at the end here.
Okay, so I gave you 1.5 for questions, 3 points for the speech, which was among the very good opposition. It was, from my point of view, the weakest part, and 4 points for the discussion, which came up to 9.5, and I didn't round it up due to basically 2 things. I basically almost agree with your qualitative explanation, which I think was very good that you brought it in, because this was something I was really missing in the report, where I was rounding up from 5.5. But I have some subtleties there where I don't completely agree. And the second thing was, like, you discussed the fittings on the slide 31, but didn't spot it, the issue with the inconsistency. That's something like the minor things. But other than that, it's a 9 with me, and it's even a bit stronger 9 than the one before. But I started higher, so there I had very little space to move. Okay, staying with you. If we come to the second opponent, the reviewer, you gave the low score? Yeah, I think you were very, very precise. It should be review, not the second opposition, and not an opposition of the opposition. So I gave you 1.4 questions, 1.5 for the review of the report, 0.6 for the review of the opposition, and 1 point for the discussion analysis, which came up with like 5.1 or something like that. So basically, in all the parts, it was a medium performance, so to say, except of the review of the opposition, where I simply couldn't agree with you, because as you saw, I was very high with the grades for the opposition. You are really critical, and content-wise, I didn't really like the questions. Like you asked about the question of the vertical movement, but you gave him no chance to answer. Like, he tried to open a slide and explain you something. It's just tell me yes or no, and what we do with the answer. And also, like, for the opposition, you were very critical on what else should they have done, but they have really spent all their time very productively, so I don't think it's a good criticism saying you should have done this and that. But okay, I'm just one of the... And going to the... We are clearly not communicating with Daniel, as you see.
Okay, so overall I might be high. That's due to the fact that I rounded up. So in terms of questions, I possibly see it likewise. I had 1.5 in that section, so you had a lot of questions, and I like that you questioned a lot of things. So you came then to the review of the report. It's 2, another 2 points. Review of the opposition, 1.5. Then I gave you the discussion analysis, 1.5, and finally for the Miss Physics points, 1, because I thought that you brought some points and they could be brought in by both, so that point there. The discussion analysis, I was with 1.5. I didn't go higher because there you had that thing with the friction coefficient that I think there can be some additional experiments to justify this, at least to see whether they are in the right range. I'm on the opposite side. I actually like when you question a lot, and by the end of the day, I gave you higher marks for that, and overall, it was very clear to be able to follow you with your statements. And okay, I rounded up in comparison to what I gave before, mainly due to the fact that the questions here were clearly better than before, in the other review I saw.
Okay, thank you. Can we just double check we've got our name and signature on there? And thank you for a wonderful stage too. So congratulations to our team.
Good morning. I am Chan Yikin from Team Singapore. Today, I will be presenting problem 15, magnetic Newton's cradle. We are tasked to investigate the dynamic motion of a magnetic Newton's cradle. I vary the pendulum's center of mass position, orientation of the magnets and their magnetizations, distance between pivots, number of pendulums, as well as initial conditions. This report will be split into two sections, slow and fast energy transfer across pendulums. Let us begin with the introduction. We use 3D printed pendulums released with a robotic release mechanism and non-magnetic ceramic bearings to reduce friction and avoid interfering with the magnets. We determine the angular positions using OpenCV. Modeling each magnet as a current cylinder, we use the Biot-Savart law to calculate the magnetic field produced by one magnet, then find the infinitesimal force acting on a small surface element on the other magnet. Then we can integrate R cross F over the surface to find the magnetic torque on the pendulum. The magnetic torque on each pendulum is calculated by summing over all other pendulums. The gravitational torque is found by crossing the position vector of the center of mass from the pivot with the entire pendulum's weight. To account for dissipation, we include a term for air drag. We also find the normal force at the pivot by summing the magnetic and gravitational forces in the radial direction and the centrifugal force, allowing us to include a pivot friction term into our equations of motion. I experimentally determined the dissipation constants, moment of inertia, and magnetizations for all magnets used. Let us begin with beating and slow energy transfer. Releasing one pendulum far apart, we observe beating. To characterize energy transfer, we define energy proportion in each pendulum as the fraction of total kinetic, gravitational, and magnetic potential energy. We plot the first pendulum's energy proportion. Compared to the collision forces in a normal Newton's cradle, the magnetic forces are weaker, so complete energy transfer takes multiple cycles. This explains beating. Returning to position against time, we take the fast Fourier transform and observe two frequency peaks which correspond to the two normal modes. Let's begin with an analysis of the normal modes. We use a spring mass analogy with outer springs for gravity and inner spring for magnetic force. We model each pendulum as a massless rod with an effective tip mass found by equating the gravitational torque. We find the horizontal restoring force and rearrange it as F equals to kx. Now we consider the magnetic force. We approximate the magnets as dipoles and calculate the force. A first-order Taylor expansion used the spring constant and a constant term. With the two spring constants found, we can solve our system of equations. The solution has three terms, a constant offset, and two cosine terms. These represent the two modal frequencies. The lower modal frequency is the in-phase mode. The higher modal frequency is the anti-phase mode. We can show the modes as waveforms. The overall motion is the superposition of the two normal modes. Looking back at the FFT, the peaks are correctly predicted by the linear theory. Now, let's investigate many pendulums. With 3 pendulums and releasing one, we observe beat-like phenomena as well. Taking the FFT, we observe 3 dominant frequency peaks in the first and last pendulum, implying 3 normal modes. Interestingly, the middle pendulum only has 2 peaks. To investigate this, we extend our linear theory. We add a new mass and we also account for weak magnetic forces between the two end masses. Solving, we obtain three normal modes: in phase, anti-phase, and breathing. The middle pendulum does not move in mode 2. This explains why it is not observed in the FFT. However, the end pendulums are excited in all three modes. Since the middle pendulum is a superposition of only two modes, it displays regular beating. Since the outer pendulums are a superposition of three modes, they display more complex amplitude envelopes. With even more pendulums, the amplitude envelope appears even more complex due to the superposition of many normal modes. Due to time constraints, I will not explain further, but will be happy to discuss the complex amplitude envelope later. Moving the magnets closer, the magnetic force increases, decreasing the number of oscillation cycles for complete energy transfer. Going back to beat frequency against pivot spacing, below a critical pivot spacing, no beating is observed, as most energy is transferred in a single oscillation cycle. Now, let's examine this regime of fast energy transfer, which we will call cradling. There are three important behaviors of a normal Newton's cradle: in phase, anti-phase, and what we call cradling, characterized by the instantaneous energy transfer between the two pendulums. The first two exhibit the no energy transfer and are easily observable in our system. Hence, we focus on cradling, which is the most interesting characteristic behavior of a normal Newton's cradle. We see that the cradling motion is replicated at high release angles. Plotting the fraction of total energy stored in one pendulum, we see that both graphs are very similar in that the energy proportion oscillates between 1 and near 0 within a single oscillation. Hence, to better understand this, we require a quantitative measure to characterize this motion. We call it the cradling metric. From the energy proportion against time, we extract the envelope. The cradling metric eta is simply the width of this envelope. Let's see how eta changes with different types of motions. For in-phase and anti-phase motion, there is no energy transfer. Energy is split evenly between pendulums, and energy proportion in each pendulum remains constant at 0.5. So eta, which is the width of the envelope, equals 0. For perfect cradling, there is complete energy transfer. All energy is split alternately between pendulums, and the energy proportion in each pendulum oscillates between 0 and 1. Thus, eta, which is the width of the envelope, equals to 1. For a magnetic Newton's cradle, the width of the envelope may change over time. So we compute the time average cradling metric. Plotting this against different initial angles of the left pendulum, we notice that the average cradling metric increases with higher angles. Basically, the motion is more similar to a normal Newton's cradle at higher initial angles. Let's understand why. We begin with low initial angles, where the motion is largely in phase. When released from low angles, the velocity is lower, thus the separation distance remains large. Plotting the magnetic torque against time, a weaker torque is spread across a longer interaction time. During this prolonged interaction phase, both pendulums move in the same direction, which is exactly the in-phase motion observed in the low-angle regime. Since energy is transferred is low, it has a low cradling metric. Moving on, we see that in the intermediate angle regime, the time average cradling metric is around 0.5. In this regime, the magnets move faster, decreasing the separation distance. Thus, a higher magnetic torque is spread across a shorter interaction time. Since the magnets interact for a shorter time, instead of swinging in phase, the first magnet will return to the equilibrium position. Thus, when the other magnet swings back, the first magnet already has a small velocity. This repeats over many collisions until both pendulums are anti-phase, thus having an eta of 0. Plotting the energy proportion of the left pendulum against time, the system indeed transitions between cradling, where eta is high, and anti-phase, where eta is 0. Thus, the transitions between cradling and anti-phase cause the time average eta to be 0.5. On to the high angle regime. Releasing from high angles, the velocity is highest, thus having the lowest separation, causing extremely high magnetic torque over a very short time. Since the interaction time is so short, the first magnet barely moves during the collision, while the other magnet swings away. This motion is similar to a normal Newton's cradle. Now, we vary both initial angles and obtain the time average cradling metric. The color represents the value of eta. We exclude points that become attracted and observe good theory data agreement. To obtain cradling-like motion in the blue regions, we need more asymmetric initial conditions. To obtain more anti-phase motion in the red regions, we need more symmetric initial conditions. Finally, let's examine more magnets. To extend our cradling metric to N magnets, consider a normal Newton's cradle. Only the edge magnets have most energy at any given time. Thus, for N magnets, the cradling metric is simply the energy in one of the edge pendulums divided by the total energy of the two edge pendulums. For 3 magnets, we observe a similar trend to the 2-magnet case, with cradling at asymmetric and antiphase at symmetric initial conditions. Comparing, we see that the 3-magnet case has fewer blue regions, indicating less cradling as it is more difficult to transfer energy across a chain of pendulums. On to some further insights. The beating and cradling regimes previously investigated in this report are not chaotic. However, with large initial angles and pivot spacings, we observe chaos when the pendulums attract. Experimentally, we see the onset of chaos once nearby trajectories reach the saddle point, which emerges due to the potential energy minima when the two pendulums attract, which diverge quickly. We also theoretically obtain the Lyapunov exponent for a grid of initial conditions to quantitatively verify chaos. Finally, in the many magnets case, we observe the energy to eventually disperse to all pendulums, which we can discuss later. In summary, I modeled the magnets as current cylinders, examined beating at large distances, while also investigating the cradling behavior at small distances. Here are my references. Thank you.
Thank you. We go straight on to questions of the opponent.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for a wonderful report, and please answer my questions in brief. So first of all, can you in one sentence summarize what is the interest in behavior that is particularly examined in your report?
Are you talking about the difference or similarity?
No, the interest in, just the interest in behavior. One difference, one similarity, please.
The difference is more interesting because there's beating behavior, because it's weakly coupled. And we can actually observe normal Newton's cradle behavior at high initial angles.
Okay, so the focus is on beating.
Yes, both are interesting.
Okay, so the next question will be, like, you have mentioned that there's an asymmetrical comparing with symmetrical releasing methods. So have you considered that, like, first of all, have you considered an asymmetrical phase situation where you release one magnet from the side and 2 magnets from the other? Will it be similar to that releasing one magnet from the side and none from the other?
I have experimentally investigated that case.
Okay, so will there be any differences?
No.
Okay.
We observe energy to simply disperse along all the pendulums.
Okay, thank you. Next question will be, so I've seen that in your theoretical analysis, you have examined how the further magnets influence each other. What will be the magnitude, for example, in a 5-magnet case? What will be the magnitude from the non-adjacent magnets?
It will be much lower because the magnetic force scales with d to the power.
For example, how much percent of the closest magnets?
I can't really give you an exact number now.
Okay, so, but you have accounted those in your theoretical analysis?
Yes, we account for all magnet
Okay, we can discuss that later to see your detailed experiments and theoretical analysis. And have you considered the independent parameters effect of distance between magnets and string length and magnetization?
Yes, we investigated the string length and the distance between pivots, which we can discuss later.
Okay, yes, I guess we can discuss that later. What is the main source of energy dissipation in the system?
Main source of energy is the pivot friction.
pivot friction, which is a type of damping, right?
Yes, it's a type.
Do you think that eddy current is one of the sources of damping as well?
No, and I've theoretically calculated an order of magnitude for that.
And it's very small, right?
Yes.
Okay, we can discuss that later. And final question will be, is the chaotic behavior significant in this phenomenon?
We require very specific conditions, which is large pivot distances and high release angles.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, preparation of the opponent, 3 minutes. Thank you.
帮我做一下，帮我做一下，帮我做一下。Habujo from Team China, and now going to present my opposition report on question 15, magnetic Newton's cradle. So first, let's give a brief review on topic and what purposes must our opponents satisfy throughout this presentation. So first of all, we believe that they have done a great job establishing a proper experimental setup to get the phenomenon of, for example, beating and cradling. Secondly, they should compare the difference between a traditional and magnetic cradle, which they have also done a great job. However, the qualitative and quantitative model built upon theoretical model to predict the system motion is not that fully sufficient, provided by our opponents, which can be further discussed. And they did not actually analyze the characteristics in the system motion about how other parameters affect it, which will be a further central in discussion in the following section. So first, summarizing their report, theoretically, they reproduced the phenomenon very good, and they modeled different phases and modes for a classic Newton's cradle and made a comparison between them. And they analyzed the slow energy transfer using the spring substitutions to simplify, which has particular errors which we'll discuss further. And they analyzed different parameters such as the spacing, initial angles, and cradling metric, and probable chaos is actually not presented in their report, which we will also further clarify on. Experimentally, they have provided a good setup using magnets, 3D printed pendulum, and OpenCV, and they investigated the frequency, modes, and multiple phases, and initial angles, but not actually the Lyapunov exponent, which we believe is an important factor to consider in this report. Evaluating the report theoretically, they have a lot of mirrors. For example, they gave a qualitative explanation on the phenomenon of beating, about the regime classification, and the superposition of different modes resulting in the beating phenomenon. And also quantitatively, they used the first order tile expansion to solve for the motion of the system and used the dipole model to approximate the linear rise situation. And they obtained the normal modes of the system and the corresponding normal frequencies through linearization. However, there are more concerns. For example, they did not investigate the possible phases in the system, which we believe is the most important classification in this topic. For example, the quasi-periodic behaviors and the non-linear phases and the final steady phases, which the Lyapunov exponent is going to approach zero. And they did not use a phase diagram, bifurcation diagram, etc. to further investigate the nonlinear behaviors. And there's insufficient discussion on the wave propagation, which will be our discussion topic in the future. Now, there's also a lack of quantitative calculation. For example, they did not verify the linear damping behavior, and the dipole model will lead to a large near-field error. And also, they did not quantify the eddy current, which they said they have, we'll see in the appendix. And they did not count for the error of linearization, and it did not specify the definition of chaos and Lyapunov exponent, which we believe is very probable in today's discussion. And also experimentally, they have a lot of merits, for example, using OpenCV to track the behavior and comparing three behaviors of magnetic Newton's cradle. However, there are more concerns. For example, their experimental video is really unclear, and we are not sure how they are releasing their magnet. And also, the bearings in the system cannot create a large damping because other ways, for example, using a paint contact will be a better method to reduce the friction. We'll have further discussion on this. And also, they did not explain how the parallax or eddy current is dealt in their experiment. So these are some of our suggestions for our opponents. First of all, they should further investigate on the nonlinear dynamics in the system because they used a dipole model and a linearized approximation of a spring system to approximate this situation. However, there are lots of nonlinear dynamics in the system, for example, which can be illustrated using bifurcation diagrams for critical points in their motion pattern, which are not elaborated on by our opponents. And also, there should be a further discussion on multiple magnet case where a wave propagation instead of a direct energy propagation method can be further explained. And also, they should specify a definition of the Lyapunov exponent and the chaotic behavior in this phenomenon and using better methods to release the magnet. Now, I reckon you can reconnect your computer. Yeah, okay. Look at your theory and turn to page 24, please. 24. Yeah. 24. So yeah, this page essentially illustrates how you're using the dipole model to illustrate the forces between the magnets, and then using a tile expansion to calculate the forces. So have you verified the experimental accuracy of this approximation using dipole and Taylor? expansion?
So I believe that you have misunderstood my report. So let me just clear this up. So firstly, for the numerical simulation, we consider the entire current cylinder model, where we discretize the magnet into infinitesimal elements with certain magnetizations. The only time that we use the linear model is when we predict the frequency peaks of each normal mode. So this is what we motivate the simplified linear theory with to derive the normal modes.
Yeah, okay, but like essentially, if you're using this current cylinder model, then why don't you just apply it throughout the whole range? And what precisely? Because like eventually, your experimental presentation or experimental comparison with your theoretical analysis is the FFT graphs, right? So then where precisely are you using those current cylinder model?
Okay, so I believe that the analytical model and the numerical simulation both have their merits. So for the numerical simulation, it allows us to consider every single effect, from the magnetic force, the finite size of the magnet, and damping.
Yeah.
So it allows us to attain accurate predictions for the numerical model, which we widely use. However, the linear model is also useful because it allows us to attain an analytical expression for the frequencies for each normal mode. So as you can see,
like just to summarize briefly, like you're using this to solve for an analytical solution that is illustrated in your diagrams eventually, right?
Yes.
So what do you think will be the estimated error associated with this model?
I believe that the simplified linear model's error will be quite low because we only use it to investigate beating, which only occurs when the pendulums are far apart.
Okay.
So there's low magnetic non-linearities and low angles.
Yeah, we can keep our ideas on this because essentially beating is one of the most interesting behavior that you have mentioned. So yeah, even when there's a large, even when the distance is large, which we have not really specified in your experiment, because like the distance in your experiment is kind of small, visualized in visualization. So we can hold different opinions on that because you have not yet given a clear error analysis chart. So we can keep different opinions on that about the error analysis. Let's talk about different excitation modes, just as I've asked in the short questions. So, for example, releasing two magnets from one side and one magnet from the other side, why would that be the same in a situation where you release one magnet from one side? Because, obviously it will not be the same in a traditional Newton's cradle situation, right?
Yes. So I believe that if you consider the two magnet case, we wouldn't observe the characteristic motion where when you release two magnets, another two magnets come out the other side. And if you come to the board, I can explain it.
Yeah, so what is the mechanism of what is the difference between the wave or energy transformation mechanism here comparing to other situations?
So the main reason for the difference is that the magnetic force is a long-range force. Do you agree? So like if it's the magnetic force against distance, as the distance increases, the magnetic force drops sharply as 1 over d to the power of 4, right? So then because it is a long-range force, therefore the magnetic torque between two pendulums will be roughly high for a large distance. So for example, let's say if we consider the case that you mentioned where
can you be more straightforward?
Yes, if you release two pendulums, what we will observe is that the first pendulum wouldn't transfer all the energy. And instead, some of the magnetic torque will cause it to reflect backwards.
Oh, so like it will reflect backwards. Well, I mean, that is kind of like an interesting behavior that you could further analyze comparing to only classify it into one asymmetrical and one symmetrical behavior, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, that is the end of this topic. And yeah, thank you so much. And the next question will be, in your theoretical analysis, can you present the page where you estimated, like you made a linearized linearized approximation using springs, and then you considered the forces between different, further magnets?
So for the three magnet case, how I obtained the normal modes.
Case.
Yes, so this is how I did it.
Like for Chem2, where's the account for that? Like where's that term in your theory?
Oh, in the system of equations?
Yeah.
Okay, so it will, after you write the system of equations, similar to the two magnet case, so now instead of having like mx...
No, I mean like just directly presenting where's that term in your equation. Like, is that the one with a coefficient of 3?
Yes. So that's Km2. But
why is that 3? Like, where's that? How do you derive that?
So do you want me to go through the coupled oscillator derivation?
Yeah, because like intuitively, if you're using the dipole model approximation, then it should be like 1 over 8 of the force between. Like for example, thank you. For example, if you're considering 3 pendulums here and they're both with equal distance, then the forces of these two magnets, like the adjacent magnets, will be 8 times the force of these two non-adjacent magnets. Then why is there a coefficient of 3 here?
Why is there a coefficient?
Yeah.
Because we have derived it from the coupled oscillator. But are you trying to ask me for a physical reason why?
Yeah, like intuitively reason why.
It's quite hard to obtain
Because like
physical reason.
Yeah, I believe that this is kind of being like this is significant, but because like your equation involves a square root, so I'm not just sure how you derive that using the dipole model.
Okay, so maybe I can just walk through the derivation to clear everything up. So do you agree that the top three equations are a system of equations for a three-magnet case?
Yeah, they're pretty complex.
Yeah, so then we can convert it into matrix form, accounting for the coupling between all the magnets. Then,
okay, so
yeah, so then we set the determinant equals to 0 because we're solving for non-trivial solutions.
Okay, so can you just directly tell me, like, for what percentage is your your forces from two magnets comparing to your one magnet cases? Like, how large is that according to your calculation?
So are you asking me how much the difference in scale of the magnetic?
Yeah, because like this is only a magnets case, right?
Yes.
But you're also considering it in multiple magnet case, where it's like 4 magnets, 5 magnets, and I want to know like what is the magnitude of that, and did you actually consider it in your multiple magnet cases?
Are you talking about the analytical model or the numerical model?
Either of them.
Okay, so for the analytical model, we can simply write all the system of equations and account for every single nearest neighbor coupling. However, for the numerical model, we also account for the magnetic torque exerted by all magnets on every magnet.
Okay, so essentially you're considering about the whole situation. Yeah, we'll assume that you have done so then, which is a pretty good job. Let's talk about chaotic behavior here. So have you estimated, like you just mentioned that a chaotic behavior is going to be satisfied when there's a particular initial condition?
Yes, yes. So
what is that initial condition?
So now we are investigating pivot spacings that are much larger. So this is around 12.5 cm.
Do you have a xt graph, like or like theta t graph for 5 magnet cases?
5 magnet cases?
Yeah. Like the motion graph for 5 magnet cases.
Wait, when you're just talking about chaos?
Yeah, for example, because like in our opinion, intuitively, we believe that chaotic behavior will occur in multiple magnet situations, such as the 5 magnet cases.
Yes, I agree. And the qualitative explanation is the same as the 2 magnets, which is when the pendulums.
I don't think so. It's not quite the same. Can you give me a graph directly of energy propagation or motion of 5 magnet cases?
Okay, I have a 30 magnet case in the.
I mean, 5 magnet cases.
The 30 magnet case is here. So I plotted the energy.
Not a 30. Yeah, okay, it's 31. Yeah, you can see that there's, well, I mean, this is simulation, right? This is simulation.
Yes,
but like in your experiment, or like, have you actually calculated the Lyapunov exponent to verify that in a particular condition there will be chaos only?
No, I do not believe there will be chaos in the high number of pendulums if they only remain in the repulsing regime.
You have investigated 5 magnet cases, right?
Yes, I have.
Is there a motion graph for that?
Yes.
So, like, if we actually view the motion graph, then we will probably observe a very irregular and like very chaotic behavior here. So, if you're so can you explain, like, if there's no chaotic behavior, then why can't we observe a periodic behavior or a energy propagation method here?
I believe that since the theory and experiments still match in the high number of magnets and low spacing regime, there indeed still isn't chaos.
Okay, so how many experiments have you done for each of these trials?
Like 3.
3?
Yes.
Okay, then it's kind of counterintuitive because, like, for example, for your theta 5 and theta 4, we cannot actually observe a very clear pattern of oscillation or a clear pattern of periodic behavior in these motion. Well, your 3 experiments still fits well with your data. So we believe that you should further calculate on the Lyapunov exponent here to verify.
Perhaps could I elaborate on why chaos onsets in our system in the first place? So essentially what we have done is we can calculate the potential energy of the system, accounting for both magnetic and gravitational potential energy. And what we observe here is a saddle point, where there's 2 maximas from the repelling and the maximum angle displacement from gravitational potential energy.
Yeah.
And then there are 2 minimas as seen in the blue regions, which correspond to the stable equilibrium position when gravity balances magnetic force, and a very steep drop, which corresponds to when the pendulums attract.
How is that relevant to the topic?
Yeah, so basically a saddle point is required for the onset of chaos because it leads to the divergence of nearby trajectories.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that will be an account, but like more directly or straightforwardly, we suggest still the calculation of the exponent, and then you can verify that. For example, in the multi-magnet cases, intuitively we will observe a non.
Okay, we're going to have to stop you there. That is the end of your time.
Okay, so yeah, just to summarize up this discussion, we have a very meaningful discussion. So first of all, we have discussed about the excitation methods of like different types of pendulums. For example, releasing two from the side and one from the other side. And we believe that this is also a regime that, a type of behavior that our opponents can further discuss on. And also, a lot of experimental concerns were not covered in our discussion, but I pointed out in my report about their releasing method and unclarity of their whole experimental setup. But I guess we can further discuss in our reviewer's report. And also, we believe that first, the most important concern is on chaotic behavior, because like intuitively, we have seen their theta t graphs for the 5 magnets cases, and we cannot observe a clear periodic behavior or like a regular behavior in that. So we kind of concerned that there's a chaotic behavior, which is not, again, verified by our opponents. And also, we have had a lot of other discussions on the dipole model approximation, the accuracy of it, but we suggest our opponents provided further clearer model on their error analysis, especially for the linearization model and dipole model they have used and the Tull extensions they have used.
Thank you very much. And we go straight to questions from the reviewer.
From Team Korea. To the reporter and opponent, thank you for the wonderful report and discussion. I'd like to start by questioning the reporter. You mentioned about the beating motion and the cradle motion, but could you explain what the physical insight there is behind the beating motion?
So the beating motion is interesting because we cannot observe it in the normal Newton's cradle. And we only observe it in our system because the magnets are weakly coupled.
Okay, so is it correct that you used a linear model as a mass spring model itself?
That was only to derive the normal modes.
Okay, so in the modes you analyze, each modes had different amplitudes of peaks. What does the physical insight is there behind those peak amplitudes differing?
So the power attributed to each normal mode simply comes from the initial conditions that we input to the system. So for example, if we start the two pendulums in the same direction, there will be a higher power attributed to the in-phase.
So to the opponent, you mentioned a lot about chaos and the linearity of the equation of an analytical solution. Do you think that the linear equation solves and gives a good solution to this problem?
It only solves in particular cases, but not all the cases, especially for multiple magnets.
So what do you think the nonlinear effect will have in the model itself?
It will lead to chaotic behavior. It will lead to their whole theoretical model collapse because they're using linearization approximation.
Do you think the chaotic motion itself is an interesting behavior?
Of course it is.
To the opponent, do you think the chaotic motion itself is an interesting behavior?
Yes, I think it's interesting.
Can you change to page 72?
17?
2.
72?
72.
72.
Could you show the motion for chaos situations?
Yes, of course.
So you mentioned about specific initial displacements of it being larger than the pivot distance, but in those cases, for the chaotic regime, don't you think that when the pendulum flips, the magnets will retract rather than repulse?
Sorry, could you repeat?
So for the higher initial angle displacement, don't you think that magnets will attract rather than repulse?
Yes, that's exactly why we observe chaos.
But isn't that against the problem statement?
I believe there's still interesting behavior, and that's why I put in the further insights.
Then how, for the opponent, do you think that this still fits the problem statement itself?
This is not part of the problem statement, but chaotic behavior does not only exist in this issue.
Then what's the chaotic motion you think? Because this case, I think this happens due to attraction of repulse.
Yeah, of course. Well, chaotic behavior always occurs because the energy propagation method in this system is very complexing, and you have to couple all the forces in the multiple magnet case. And eventually,
how do you think that the reporter themselves could actually solve for this chaotic motion?
Calculating the Lyapunov exponent.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You have preparation time.
Okay, so I'll start my review on the number 15 magnetic Newton's cradle, and the problem statement is as follows. For the reporter summary, he gave a qualitative explanation about the cradling motion and its interesting motion itself, and the linear theory to investigate 2 and 3 mode cases. Quantitatively, he used a current cylinder model and Lorentz force to characterize the magnetic torque of each pendulums, and experiment-wise, he used a non-magnetic bearing and tracked with open CV. And he did a FFT to check for N-mode peaks. And lastly, for the experiment results, he did a cradling metric to define cradling, with the cradling metric being eta. And for higher initial angle, magnetic Newton's cradle is similar to mechanical cradle was given from the experimental results. Now, I'll begin the reporter evaluation. He had some strengths and possible improvements. The strengths being that he qualitatively compared the dynamics of typical Newton's cradle and magnetic cradle. He observed the beating and gave analysis of qualitative meaning and various motion cases characterized in phase, anti-phasing, and cradling. The transition between the motion cases were effectively analyzed, and controlled release and tracking methods were good for the experiments. However, for the possible improvements, there was no qualitative explanation about how two oscillations were mixed, and less varied parameters for motion, such as the length of the pendulums, the magnetization of magnets, and only looked at the pivot distance between the pendulums. The trajectory of the pendulum was not fully explored, as although they've given the angular displacements of those pendulums, they haven't exactly explored the various motions itself, because they've only looked at the energy transforms and to explain the beating motion itself. So I don't think there was enough physical insight into it, and there was not enough physical explanation for parameter dependency on beating. As I've mentioned before, there was less varied parameters and only looked at the pivot positions. And there was a lack of quantification of chaos and was only looked at in the further insights, although they've admitted to, for smaller angles, that it's only a linear approximation, and there's wave propagation was not fully explained. Now for the opponent evaluation, he summarized the report, pointed out the absence of nonlinearity, made such suggestions on wave propagation and chaotic motion. Debate on other motion of Newton's cradle was conducted and raised concerns on coefficient uncoupled oscillators. No further suggestions on possible phases was the possible improvements, as the opponent only focused on the nonlinearity and the chaotic motions themselves. There was poor time management. Even reporter-provided derivation and discussions were made on minor points, and I do not believe that, although this problem is supposed to discuss about the similarity and the differences of a magnetic Newton's cradle with a Newton's cradle, the discussions themselves were only about analytical equations. And there was unproductive discussions on chaotic motion, and not enough discussion on comparison between classical and magnetic Newton's cradle, as I've mentioned before. Now, I'll move on to the discussion analysis. The first discussion topic was the dipole model calculating forces. The opponent asked for the justification for linearization for pendulum motion, and for the reporter, for numerical solution, were only used for the current cylinder model, only used a linear model to actually approximate for the smaller angles. I agree with the reporter that for smaller angles, the nonlinearity would be negligible, and for the second discussion, they talked about other displacements. The opponent talked about displacing two from one side and the other from the other, and the reporter qualitatively explained this through the diagrams. I agree with both the reporter and opponent. However, the discussion is sufficient, though I believe that for interesting behavior investigation, these topics should have been reported. For the spring modeling pendulum, there was talk about how the opponent, this is also for the nonlinearity cases, how normal modes justify for each case effect. The reporter showed stiffness matrix to justify the equation. I agree with the reporter, agree that there is some clarity with the physical insight, which was stated by the opponent. However, the physical equations provides proof. And lastly, they had the majority of the discussion about chaotic behaviors. Opponent talked about how it happens when it satisfies specific initial cases. And the reporter replied with, yes, the mechanism-wise explanation is enough for two magnet cases. And I agree with the reporter as the fact that chaos is irrelevant of the number of bods. However, I do believe that it should have been investigated. Lastly, for further suggestions, as the reporter had fewer parameter dependency cases, I think they should have looked more on the parameters and effect of equilibrium geometry. And lastly, for the analysis of chaos due to not complying with the problem statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have time for concluding remarks from the reporter.
Okay, thank you to the opponent and the reviewer for the insightful discussion. Firstly, the opponent raised the point on the dipole model. I'd like to clarify that I only used it to analytically derive the modal frequencies, and we used a full numerical simulation to model the position-time motion. Additionally, we also investigated on the point on the investigation into different initial conditions. I believe that the symmetric and asymmetric cases are very interesting, as they give us insight into how the cradling characteristics change for the two-magnet case. Additionally, on the derivation of expressions for the modal frequencies, we treated the system as coupled oscillators and expressed it in matrix form, which we then calculated the eigenvalues to obtain the modal frequencies. Next, on the point on the dynamical analysis of chaos, we calculate the Lyapunov exponents for the whole state space for two magnets, and the saddle point in the potential energy landscape is critical for the onset of chaos, which only happens in the attracting case under specific initial conditions. Next, on points raised by the reviewer pointed out on the poor physical insight behind beating and cradling. I believe that beating falls under the interesting behavior as it is not observable in a normal Newton's cradle due to the strong contact forces compared to the weak coupling in a magnetic Newton's cradle. Additionally, on the relevance to the chaos to the problem statement, I believe chaos is only observed in attracting cases. And although it's not directly relevant to the problem statement, it is still interesting, which is why I added it to our further insights. Next, on the parameter dependency on beating, I believe that the most important parameters here are initial release conditions and pivot spacings, and both were investigated and qualitatively explained using the rate of energy transfer. Lastly, on the point of wave propagation, investigation was conducted into the wave-like behavior, but was not presented due to time constraints, which I'll be happy to discuss later. So to summarize my report, I modeled the magnet as current cylinders, I examined beating at large distances, and investigated the cradling behavior at small distances. Here are my references. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, can we get the reporter, the opponent, and the reviewer up at the front for jury questions?
Question to the reporter. When you hear me, yeah? When you model, do the simulation for in magnets, like multiple magnets, what do you input as initial conditions? Do you input as the equilibrium positions or just approximate that they are vertical?
As in, for which graph specifically are you talking about?
When you model, like when you release the first magnet from a certain angle, what do you input as the initial conditions for the rest of the magnets?
Okay, so that part will depend on, so let's say for the phase plot where I obtain the cradling metric against different initial conditions, I specify each of the individual angles which is tracked in using computational software. However, if I were to just use the normal trajectory against time, I will calculate the stable equilibrium that if I hold the magnet at a certain point, and then what is the stable equilibrium points.
Okay.
Can I see the slide number 70?
70.
70, yeah, 70. Perfect. So for the three magnets, there seems to be something like a figure for like a finger in the x equals z, x equal y.
Yes.
So can you somehow comment on why something like that?
Yeah. So that
observable there.
That point simply corresponds to when the two pendulums swing in phase. And when they swing in phase, there'll be no energy transfer, so eta is very low.
Sorry, but may I get some more explanation on these diagrams? First of all, the red triangle, what is the message? I just couldn't follow that, sorry. And honestly, what is the main message with the different colors of regimes in a deducted, bit simpler way?
Okay, allow me to clarify. So on the x-axis, we have theta 1, which is the angle of the pendulums. And I've cut out half of the graph. That's why the graph only appears as a triangle, as it is symmetrical under reflection. Okay. Then I've cut out the red points because that corresponds to when the magnets attract and they will start to stick together. And different colors represent the value of the time average cradling metric. So here, we see blue colors represent very high cradling metrics, which corresponds to when the motion looks like a normal Newton's cradle. But the redder regions look like when the system looks more like in-phase or anti-phase motion. And then what we see is that if we look at the diagonal along here, it will be very dark red because the motion corresponds to anti-phase motion where there's no energy transfer. However, in the blue regions, that corresponds to a normal Newton's cradle-like motion, which corresponds...
I think you've explained that one. Do we have anyone further at the other? Oh.
I have a question to the reporter. So you basically showed us that for higher amplitudes, a direct energy transport to the next pendulum might happen. Did you also change the lengths and get an idea about when I have different lengths and different distances when it happens?
The length of the center of mass.
Yes, it's just the length, length of the pendulum, center of mass, yes, right.
I did not investigate that, but I believe that it would not qualitatively change the motion.
Is there some kind of a critical angle for a certain length that you can say you have like the best direct energy transfer?
Perhaps if the center of mass is slightly longer, then the gravitational potential energy will be higher. So it converts to more kinetic energy, which leads to possibly higher cradling.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, to the reporter, you model the motion as one-dimensional motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I want to ask you about wave propagation. Briefly tell me what important results you got there.
Okay, so I've theoretically investigated the 30 magnet case as shown just now. And what we observe is that there would be an initial wave. However, it eventually disperses because of the long-range effects of the magnets. So here, I plot the pendulum index on the y-axis, and on the x-axis is time. Then the contour plot simply tells us the energy proportion stored in each pendulum. Then what we observe is first a red diagonal line, which corresponds to energy propagating as a wave. However, we see that the initial wave disperses after a while.
Okay, stopping on that one.
Question to the opponent. On the board, on the board, you seem to have a graph force against D. Can you just confirm on the whiteboard that you've written to the opponent? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, this one.
The equation is 1 over D to the 4, and then you wrote a factor of an 8.
Further
Can
up.
you just explain that?
This one? Oh, because like using the dipole model, then we believe that the magnetic field strength will be proportional to the distance to the -3 degrees, so that when the distance doubles, the magnetic force will become 1 over 8 of the initial value.
Okay, just it was 1 over D to the 4 on
1
the
over
graph.
8.
Yeah, we're going to have to stop there because I've already let it go across time. Thank you. Can we... We could get everyone's attention for the final time this morning and the final time in the IYPT. We get to the mark section, and so I ask, first of all, that you turn your card to the mark for the reporter. So the mark for the reporter, and hold up now. We have... So we have 8, 9, 8, 10, 9, 9, 7, 7. And then for our opponent, ready with your opponent, and holding up, we've got 6, 7, 7, 9, 6, 6, 7, 6. And finally, for our review team, if you hold up your mark for the review, we have 7, 9, 8, 8, 7, 7, 7, 7. Okay, we get to this stage where we talk about variations. So obviously, somebody's already got a microphone.
Yeah? Do you want me to do it all at once or one by one?
No, one at a time, one at a time. I know they're going to be related, but one at a time.
Sure.
So, your mark of, what was it?
A 10 in the report.
Yeah.
So basically, my reasoning was simple. In the final, of course, and also in general, I write grades in comparison. If the other reports were 6 and 7, this was a 10 for me. And if you want details, everything was everything was scientifically sound. Maybe I would have argued that you took like a little bit of extra time explaining more simplistic things, and maybe if you included wave propagation in the main presentation, it would be better. But like, it's your presentation, and whatever results you showed were like like delightful, excellent. I was delighted, and yeah, it was like scientifically sound, and there was some novelty, and it was very interesting. So yeah, it was a 10 for me.
Okay, well done on the 10. And one of you responding, you both had 7s?
I mainly reduced the points in the columns for experimental procedures and experimental results. You claimed that you varied many parameters, but we didn't see them, and we didn't see the release mechanism and how the video tracked the measurements and so on. And I can't create what I haven't seen in the presentation.
Okay, thank you. We move down to the opposition, and we have several 6s. Simon?
Okay, I gave you a 6. I thought that actually the questions you raised in the beginning were quite good, and in particular, sorry, I think I moved. I'm in the wrong place. Yeah, but still, I gave you 1.5 there. I thought there were some good questions. Then in the opposition speech, that was average somehow. I gave you 2 points. In the discussion, I felt you focused too much on the chaos point, which in fact is a valid point to talk about it, but you spent too much time in the discussion about this point, in my opinion. So I gave you 1.8 there, and that was rounded down to 6 in the end.
Okay, we're back over here.
Yes, thank you. So my grade was 9. So I gave you 1.25 in clarifying questions, 2.75 in speech, and 3.5 in discussion. And the main reason of my high grade is that you made it possible for the reporter even like to give us more things about his presentation. So you did your job well. You discussed and had the valid points and sort of like mildly attacked him in whatever direction you could. So that was also, I also really appreciated that. What I like would have appreciated more if you had time to like discuss wave propagation as well, and some additional things that he mentioned that he had the presentation. But overall, it was very efficient, and that's why I went up to 9.
Okay, if we bring both of them down, we have 2 people at the end here. One's for the review, one is a 7 and one is a 9, so that covers our range, and they are sat together again.
The bad thing is I just realized that I miscalculated myself in getting the 7, so I do apologize for that, but I can live with the 7, but it should have been a 6 actually. I gave you 1.25 for questions, 1.5 for the review of the report, 1.5 for the review of the opposition, 1.5 for the discussion analysis, and yet again I subtracted half a point for the missed points, because again and again and again, like this was a very full presentation, scoring very high, a rather nice opposition, like covering a lot of stuff. So I don't know where and when you would be expecting the reporter to bring more and more and more and more stuff. So all in all, yeah, it sums up to 6.25, which is a weird rounding up to 7, but it ended up on 7, and it will stay there.
Okay, and 9?
So overall, I would always like to be consistent. So I was high before, and I saw no point to go lower now. And I appreciated your calm way to present the whole review. So in detail, I gave you 1.5 for the questions, 2 for the review of the report, 1.5 for the review of the opposition, 1.5 for the discussion analysis, and even here, 1 for the missed points. I see it's slightly different. So you pointed out under the missed points that we could have given more insight into the experimental part. I'm perfectly fine with this. So, and we also found out that the opponent actually focused a little bit too much on that chaos thing, and you were so fair and gave your own opinion, idea there. So by the end of the day, I rounded up. Just because I think that you and the review before was better in terms of asking questions than the first one I saw. So that's overall horizontal, vertical, how I actually compare my marks.
Okay, thank you. Just before our president has a few words about what goes on from here on in, I'd like to thank all our three teams for their wonderful involvement this morning. I would also, as always is the case in physics fights, like to thank all of our helpers who make it run so smoothly, because it wouldn't run smoothly without them there helping achieve this. So thank you to you too.
So thank you so much. It was really relaxing for me once in a while to have a chance just to sit down in the jury and concentrate on grading rather than looking on the time and all on the screens of the teams, whether their internet connection is not on or whatever. Usually those who are coming repeatedly here are expecting me now announcing the results, because anyway I know that many of you have calculated it anyway. We'll not do it because the system which we use now is not that quick on that. But I'm sure you'll be able to spread out before the closing ceremony. If not, then we will announce it definitely during the closing ceremony. So Alan asked you to thank to all the teams, which was very wise, but I would like to ask you also to thank to all the jury members for their hard work today. I think we have seen diverse grades, but I think we have also heard a very reasonable explanation for these grades, which is very, very good. Always when I heard, because I didn't really see the grades, I just heard the audience who was ooh. I was a little bit afraid whether we have an issue here, but I don't think so. All the grades were perfectly justified. And now it's time for have lunch in the Mensa, and please be here back at 2 o'clock for the closing ceremony.